Chapter 1171. Including the head of Yuan Yang sect, Chu Rui, everyone understood that Yu Xiao School had been preparing for a long time in order to compete with Qinsong School. They had their own set of feasible strategies, and now it was time to see who was better. Taihao sect leader Shang Shooting looked around and exchanged glances with other heads, then he bowed and said, as Jinren Kongjing said, Qinsong School and its allies will not sit still and wait for death. They will seek to break out of the situation. I think attacking our mountain gate is one way. Even if Head Tan has Xianshu and can deter them, there is no guarantee that they will not take risks. Since your sect has promised that our mountain gate will not be damaged, can you take precautions in advance, so that we have no worries? Jinren Kongjing understood that this was because he was afraid that if Qinsong School was forced into a corner, they would attack at all costs. He wanted Yu Xiao to offer the Jade Cliff as soon as possible to reassure the people. But now was not the time. Because the Qianyu method of quantity victory was accumulating small victories into a big victory, the process was slow, and it was not good to use all the means at once. Only by adding firewood step by step could the fire burn brightly. So he said, "Don't worry, everyone. Since I, Yu Xiao, have promised you, I have already prepared a countermeasure. If Qinsong School dares to act rashly, I will make sure that they will not be able to return." Although Chu Rui was a conservative person, he was meticulous in his thinking. At this moment, he saw a flaw in Yu Xiao's plan and said, "If Qinsong turns around and attacks the North Underworld demon cultivators, will your sect save them or not?" The expressions of Tan Dingxian and the others became subtle. The North Underworld demon cultivators had the support of Yu Xiao School. Strictly speaking, they were also on their side. They were all very clear about this, but just now, no one mentioned it, intentionally or unintentionally ignored it. But Chu Rui's words made it clear. Jinren Kongjing smiled and said, "That's okay. The North Underworld demon cultivators and I have not signed a contract, and we have different thoughts. You and I can't be considered to be on the same path. Even if we both die, so what? Moreover, when Qinsong School attacked the northern nether continent, there was no one to protect them. The continent will definitely be broken, and the spirit of the Qinsong School will also collapse because of this. Then, under my victory by measure technique, what it will do is nothing more than reducing its own fate, seeking its own death. If the lives of a few demonic cultivators can make him pay such a price, why not?" Leaving the Dark North Demon Court behind seemed to be opening up a gap for the Qinsong School, but in reality, it was an even more dangerous place to die. Chu Rui said plainly, "That's good. It's just a demon. It's not worth my time." Immortal Tan Ding nodded. They did not know how many continents Yuya could protect, but if he had to protect the North Darkstar continent in addition to East Flower, his strength would inevitably be divided. Thus, it was naturally best to ignore those demonic cultivators. Moreover, it was already lucky that they were not all killed back then. If they died now, so be it. What did it have to do with them? Just as they were talking, everyone's expressions suddenly shook. Just now, the feeling of rising chi activity appeared again. Moreover, it was even stronger this time. If it was said to be a cluster of flames before, it was now a raging flame. This must be a change in the situation that was greatly beneficial to them. Jinren Kongjing closed his eyes and listened attentively. After a while, he opened his eyes again. His eyes were actually glowing. He stroked his beard and said, "Everyone, the sect master of the Netherworld Spring Sect, Perfected Liang, has just now made an agreement with you. If the Qinsong and Shaoqing clans join forces, the 6 sects of the spiritual sect are willing to stand with us, Yu Xiao, and fight against the enemy together." Tan Ding and the others heard this. They immediately revealed a look of joy. If the previous few methods only allowed their side to gain the upper hand, it was not very stable. However, this last piece of the puzzle had already suppressed the other party in terms of the overall situation. Jinren Kongjing's heart was already determined. He looked out of the hall. This time, it could be said that he had pulled in all the forces in the world other than the Qinsong alliance to his side. This kind of strong chi energy could probably no longer be concealed by mystic techniques. He thought to himself, "I'm already attacking frequently. Let's see how the other party responds. Qinsong School, floating celestial palace's main hall. Everyone in the hall suddenly felt an inexplicable qi activity surrounding them. They all felt that if they did not get rid of it as soon as possible, it would be disadvantageous to them. Sect Master Qin waved his horsetail whisk and took out a spell. He silently circulated it for a while and said, "This is the mystic technique that the Yuxiao school used. Just now, I've already roughly understood the meaning of this technique." With a flick of his finger, over 10 rays of spiritual light flew out and entered the eyebrows of everyone present. In an instant, everyone understood the use of this technique. Qi Hongchan frowned and said, "This mystic technique relies on the concentration of one's heart and the accumulation of qi energy. At this moment, we are already at a disadvantage. We need to quickly break out of this situation." Everyone in the hall was deep in thought, as if they were considering how to solve this problem. Zhang Yan thought for a while and understood that this technique was actually the process of both sides continuously accumulating qi energy. This was good. Both sides were piling up huge rocks. The bigger the side, the harder it was to move. What both sides needed to do was to think of ways to weaken the other side and strengthen themselves at the same time. However, this was not the best way to deal with it. This was because they were actually being dragged into the rhythm of the Yuxiao school. The best way was to think of ways to break out of this situation from the outside and eliminate this mystic technique. However, this was obviously not something that could be done easily. After thinking for a long time, he came up with a plan. He thought to himself, this method might be able to break out of this situation. Just as he was about to speak, someone outside the hall said, "Sect Master, Shaoqing Sect's Elder Shui is outside requesting an audience." Sect Master Qin said, "Invite him in." However, after a few breaths, a ray of golden light entered the hall and turned into a short Daoren. It was Shaoqing Sect's Elder Shui. He came forward and cupped his hands. He went straight to the point and said, "This lowly Taoist has come under Sect Master's orders to ask Sect Master Qin. Yuxiao's mystic technique has already gained the upper hand. Do you need me, Shaoqing, to break it?" Sect Master Qin thought for a while and asked, "What method does your esteemed sect use to break it? Are you going to use the extreme north reversal technique?" Elder Shui replied, "That's right." Sect Master Qin said, "This technique must be used carefully. We are not at such a stage yet. Let me thank Sect Master Yu." Elder Shui did not say anything else. He bowed and transformed into a ray of light before leaping away. Mengzhen cupped his hands and asked, "Master, is there anything wrong with this extreme north reversal?" Sect Master Qin said, "This technique was passed down by Shaoqing's Grandmaster Hongba. It is said that once this technique is used, it can return me to yesterday and replay the past. There are even more exaggerated claims that if this technique can be deduced to the extreme, with several mighty people working together, they can reverse the sun and moon, reverse the world, and return to the time before the qi of the earth surged." Qi Hongchan said in shock, "Is there really such an amazing technique in this world?" The Zenrens under him were also moved. Sect Master Qin said, "The reason why I didn't take it is because this technique is flawed. The Grandmaster had judged it and said that it was an incomplete technique. That's why I used it. No one knows what the outcome will be. There's no need to think about it until the last moment." Perfected Xiao said, "No wonder Sect Master Qin said to use it carefully. So that's why." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Sect Master Qin. This disciple thinks that the simplest method is to kill a few people on the other side. That should be able to stop the momentum immediately. Between the two sides, nothing was more important than each other's lives. That was the foundation. If one side continuously lost people, then the momentum would be stopped no matter what." Pu Xiansheng looked over and asked, "Palace Master Zhang, are you prepared to attack those sects?" Zhang Yan nodded. Qin Yu frowned and said, "This is not appropriate. It is not difficult for Yuxiao school to predict this. Moreover, Tan Dingxian has the Xian technique. I'm afraid that he has already set up a trap and is waiting for me to jump into it." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If I attack Taihao, Nanhua, and the other sects, naturally it will not work. Then why don't I change to another place and take down the North Underworld Demon Court? Meng Zhen said, taking down the North Underworld continent is a plan. However, I'm afraid that the Demon Court might not be in the Yuxiao formation. Even if we put in a lot of effort to take it down, we won't be able to shave much of its fate energy. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. He said, it is not one path, but we can make it one path. Qin Yu said, how do we do that? Do we force them to ask for help from Yuxiao? Yuxiao might not agree. Zhang Yan said, there is no need for that. Sect leader spiritual master has told us, and we will understand. Yuxiao's technique focuses on the hearts of people, and then the distinction between friend and foe. Then I can spread the news to the world that my Qinsong school wants to cross the heavens. At that time, the hearts of the people will naturally be divided, and it will not be one or the other. If the demon court obeys me, it will increase my power. If not, I only need to send people to break into Yuan Jun's palace, and the enemy's fate energy will definitely be reduced. Everyone thought about it and felt that it made sense. Moreover, the demon court and Qinsong had been enemies for tens of thousands of years. They would not easily let it go, and would definitely not obey. At this time, spiritual master Xiao said, it is only that Bu Tian Pavilion has the Xian technique. Although I can think of a way to break it, it will be in line with Yuxiao's intentions, and it will be using the weak to attack the strong. Zhang Yan said, therefore, the number of people going is the key. I think there is no need for many, one person is enough. If we attack the demon court like this, Yuxiao will definitely not use the Xian technique for one person. The only possible way is to send someone else to stop us. Meng Zhen said in a low voice, then the person who goes must have enough battle power and is not afraid of death. At the critical moment, he must have the heart to die with the enemy. Only then can he break the situation. Everyone understood that this was a small gain. They only needed to sacrifice one person to break the situation. However, this was really a matter of life and death. It was not worth it to use the Xian technique on one person, but when it really came to that, it was hard to say. And it was more likely that they would be surrounded and attacked by the enemy, and with the Xian technique hanging over their heads, it would not be good to send out a large number of reinforcements. Other than sect leader Qin, no matter who went, they might not return. Qi Yuntian bowed to sect leader Qin and said, sect leader spiritual master, this disciple thinks that this method can be tried. If I attack the northern underworld, it will definitely collapse the continent, and show in front of all the sects that I will not hesitate to cut off my means of retreat and sink my boats to fight to the death. This way, not only will I not lose my fate, I can also unite the hearts of the people. Meng Zhen said, then who should we send? Qi Yuntian suddenly stood up, bowed to sect leader Qin, and said emotionally, as the eldest disciple of the sect, I should naturally go. Shen Baishuang immediately objected, that's not appropriate. If Hall Master Qi goes, Yuxiao will definitely attack with all his strength, and that will not be good. Qi Yuntian was the next sect leader that was recognized by the sect. If he was killed by Yuxiao, then his fate would be greatly reduced. Mu Shoshan frowned. In reality, he was the most suitable person to go. With the help of the pool of rebirth, he would not be afraid of being surrounded, and his mana was almost limitless. The sects did not know much about him, but sect leader Qin had something else for him to do, so he could not move now. Not only him, but Meng, Sun, Shen, and the rest all received orders from the sect leader, so it was not appropriate for them to move. Hence, they all looked at sect leader Qin. Huashuanzai sighed. He was willing to go, but he knew that his cultivation was not enough. Even if he went, he might not be able to take down Yuan Jun Palace. Losing was a small matter, but it would not be appropriate to ruin the sect's plans. Zhang Yan then slowly stood up and said, everyone, there is no need to argue. This idea was suggested by me, so naturally I should go. Meng Zhen, however, did not agree and said in a deep voice, Zhenren Zhang is the Qinsong School Hall Master Du Zhen, how can we move so easily? Zhang Yan flung his sleeve and said seriously, since I am the Qinsong School Hall Master Du Zhen, how can I retreat when the sect is in danger? I will bear the responsibility. Chapter 1172. As soon as Zhang Yan finished speaking, no one in the hall made a sound. Sect leader Qin thought for a moment, then stood up and said, "Hall Master Duzhen, follow me to the back hall, I have something to tell you." Zhang Yan acknowledged and followed the sect leader to the back hall. The two of them sat down and sect leader Qin said, "To carry out the task of destroying the mountain and destroying the sect, it's either that the people in the sect are not strong enough or that they have responsibilities. Only you can do it. Even though the layout of the Lord of Origin Palace is stable, the Qinsong School has its own plans. Take this Dragon Soul Essence first. At the crucial moment, you can use the deep water to attack the mountain gate." Zhang Yan took the Dragon Soul Essence and bowed. "Thank you, sect leader." Sect leader Qin said, "The road ahead is dangerous and there are many enemies waiting. It's not appropriate to go like this. I will give you another talisman. Even if there are mystical techniques, you can still try to avoid them." Zhang Yan thanked him again and kept the talisman solemnly. He understood that only one person could use it to protect himself. If there were many people, then the sect could only use mystical techniques to break through mystical techniques. This would be the most disadvantageous to the Qinsong school. Sect leader Qin said, "This trip is dangerous. What do you want? You can say it all at once." Zhang Yan said, "Today, I want to ask Northern Darkness Shinran for help to subdue the demon." Just as he finished speaking, he heard a loud laugh. "Zhang Yan, you are the only straightforward person in the sect. Since you are going to the north to subdue the demon, I will go with you." As the voice passed by, a black spiritual light flew into his sleeve. Sect leader Qin nodded. "Since Northern Darkness Shinran is willing to help you, then I don't have to do anything." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "I have one more thing. I am afraid that this trip will use the spiritual opportunity of the Northern Darkness continent. That will definitely cause the spirit cave to lose its foundation. I hope that sect leader Shinran will allow it." Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "If I succeed, I will be able to go to other realms. Then what is the use of this spirit cave? Just do whatever you want." Zhang Yan said, "Then I'll go back and make some preparations. I'll leave after the sect has notified the other sections." Sect leader Qin nodded. "Hall Master Duzhen," he warned repeatedly, "if you see the matter is not feasible, don't blame me. Remember, your life is the most important." Zhang Yan, "Thank you for your kindness, sect leader. This disciple understands." Sect Master Qin nodded. "Go." Zhang Yan bowed and retreated. He walked out of the hall. First, he flew up the light and headed towards the Azure Sky Hall. As soon as he entered the hall, he saw the severed demon lying on the roof of the hall, resting. Its huge body covered the entire hall. This demon had been summoned back from the North Sea several months ago. However, he was afraid that keeping it on his body would harm its ferocious nature, so he temporarily left it here before the battle. He called out to him. When Jie Yao heard his master's call, his body trembled and he obediently shrank his body. In the end, it shrank to the size of a palm, and with a streak of light, it slipped into his sleeve and hid there. He had subdued this demon queen. Zhang Yan turned to a hidden mountain peak and bowed. "Is perfected Jing Tsong here?" After a while, an old gray-robed Daoran came out and returned the greeting. "Fellow Taoist, Daoran has been waiting for you for a long time." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, you should know the current situation in the world. Right now, I need to go to the northernmost continent to attack the demon court. If I encounter danger, I need your help." Although the future was dangerous, he was not seeking death. Instead, it was beneficial to Qinsong School to protect himself. Before thinking about victory, he had to think about defeat. Before that, he had to make all preparations. If he still could not avoid the calamity after doing his best, it would be fate. He could not blame anyone. Patriarch Jing Tsong was also an ascended perfected one back then. Although he was only an avatar now, he must have left behind some means. Otherwise, how could he deal with Yuxiao School? Therefore, he came to ask for help. Perfected Jing Tsong was silent for a moment before saying, "I have received your permission to stay here for many years. If you are in trouble, Daoran will not stand idly by." Zhang Yan thanked him and did not say anything else. He descended and returned to the Xuanzisi realm. He did not return to the hall. Instead, he parted the seawater and went straight into the depths of the water. Soon he stopped in front of a 1,000-foot mound. On top of the mound, there was a stone egg. It was the divine beast egg that he had placed here in the past. He approached and said, "It's time for you to be born." As soon as he said that, he could feel a sense of joy coming from the egg. He smiled slightly and rolled up his robe, keeping it in his sleeve. If he wanted this thing to be born, he would need at least a continent's spiritual vigor. In the past, it was impossible to do so, but now was the time. Moreover, he had a plan in mind. Although Yuanjun Palace was protected by a great formation, it was only attached to the spiritual vigor of the earth. Even if Yuxiao intervened, they would not be so kind as to raise it to the level of the mountain gate formation of the 3 major sections. As long as the spiritual vigor was extracted, its foundation would be destroyed. If it was successful, he would not even need to use the dragon soul essence to force it out to fight with him. At this moment he suddenly felt spiritual light rising outside. Just now, he turned his head and heard a loud voice reverberating between heaven and earth. The voice said, "Since ancient times, my generation of cultivators of qi has used external spirits to refine our lives, to look down at the mysteries, to look up at the heavenly Tao. However, the spirit of this world is fading and there is no return. It is like a person who has been sick for a long time. It is difficult to get rid of the chronic disease. If we do not find a cure, we will not die today. Today I, the Qinsong school, have peeked into the mysteries of heaven and found a small world that can accommodate my generation. However, the spiritual vigor is insufficient. Hence, I used the qi of the earth to replenish it. Fellow Taoists of the world, if you are willing to go to a new heaven, I, the Qinsong school, am willing to accept you." As the voice rang, at this moment, regardless of the big or small sects, cultivators of the world heard it. This immediately caused the hearts of the people of the world to change. There were those who were flustered, those who were surprised, and those who were overjoyed. All of them were different, and the fate of both sides also changed accordingly. At this moment, tens of thousands of feet underground, there was a dim yellow river. A Taoist with a blurry face was sitting in the water, his body wrapped in yellow smoke. His figure looked like it was flowing with the waves, but it also seemed like it would never change. It was the head of the Netherworld Spring sect, Liang Xuani. He praised, "The Qinsong school actually wants to do such a thing. How bold." There was a person standing respectfully in front of him. It was the elder of the sect, Xinyu. He said, "It sounds nice to go to beyond the heavens, but if we are not careful, we will be destroyed." Liang Xuani shook his head and said, "Otherwise, that sect leader Qin would not dare to do such a thing without confidence. If we can successfully go beyond the heavens, I think there is a high chance of this." Xinyu was stunned. He asked carefully, "What does the head mean? Does it?" Liang Xuani waved his hand and denied. He was the one who found that world, and to go beyond the heavens, we need to rely on him. If I go, I will be completely controlled by him, and I will not be able to control myself. Moreover, even if we successfully reach that world, there might not be a place for our Ling sect to stay. There might not even be a place for our spirit sect to exist, so don't even think about it." Xinyu immediately agreed. He then said, "The head of the sect is really far-sighted. However, there will always be people who are short-sighted in the world. Once the words of the Qinsong school come out, the hearts of the 6 sects will inevitably be shaken. I will explain it clearly in a moment so that they can calm their hearts." Liang Xuani nodded and said, "There is no need to care about the Qinsong school, Yu Xiao will deal with it. We need to be wary of the Shaoqing sect. As long as this sect fights with someone, they will not hold back. This battle will be a battle of life and death, and we cannot rely on luck." On the Mo Chiu cliff, the people from the Yu Xiao school did not expect this. They were all shocked that the Qinsong school would have such a plan. Zhenren Kongzheng was lost for a moment, and then he noticed that the expressions of the people in the hall seemed to have changed. He quickly calmed himself down and scolded coldly. "The Qinsong school said this to determine the hearts of the people, but it is a pity that this is just his own opinion. The void beyond the world is so dangerous. How many people in the world will be willing to follow him? Chu Rui also said loudly, Jinren Kongjing's words are not false. Breaking through the world and leaving is so dangerous. It's so dangerous. Our cultivation base isn't high enough. If we go with the Dark Azure sect, they will definitely take care of their own disciples first and then outsiders. Even if we can reach the other side, how many of us can stay? Everyone present had deep cultivation, and after pointing out the pros and cons, they quickly calmed down. At this moment, Xiao Lingyun made a sound of surprise and said, someone from the Qinsong school came out. Everyone looked over. Tan Dingxian took a look and said in surprise, the Qinsong school's Duzhen Hall Master Zhang Yan is heading north. Is he really going to attack the demon court? How can he be the only one? Jinren Kongjing thought for a moment, and his expression changed slightly. Not good. Just now the Qinsong school has spread to the world, and the people have their own allegiance. Now the situation is different. The North Dark Demon Cultivator is already considered to be one of my people. The Qinsong school's move is to exterminate the demon clan and cut my luck. Xiao Lingyun said, but the Qinsong school only has that Zhang Jinren alone. Could it be that he can break through the Lord Yuan Palace? Jinren Kongjing frowned. It might not be him alone. Shang Shooting said, fellow Taoist, are you saying that there are people from the Qinsong school who will follow? Isn't he afraid that my Xian technique will fall behind? Jinren Kongjing shook his head. What I'm worried about is not the Qinsong school, but the Shaoqing sect. He raised his head. Everyone should know that the Shaoqing extreme sword lineage has a divine art called Heaven and Earth Close. As long as one is still in this world, one can teleport there in an instant. In the Shaoqing sect, there are at least 2 people who are proficient in the extreme sword. They can easily teleport to Zhang Yan's side and lend him a hand. Everyone shuddered. That was indeed the case. Once the Shaoqing sword cultivators were in danger, they would definitely be able to sense it. With such a teleportation technique, before the Xian technique could be used, they would have already teleported back to the sect. By the same logic, if they wanted to help someone, they could teleport to thousands of mountains and rivers in an instant. If one was unprepared, who could resist the simultaneous attacks of several swords? Jinren Kongjing sneered and said, since the Shaoqing sect has such a technique, how can I, the Yuxiao sect, not be afraid? He turned around and bowed to Tan Dingxian, saying, Sect leader Tan, I heard that your Butian pavilion has a technique called immovable circumference. Wherever this technique reaches, people in the world will no longer be able to teleport. Even the enlightened master of a heavenly abode will not be able to escape into the heavenly abode. Please use it quickly to prevent him from having any backup plans. After Zhang Yan left the great pool of Dragon Abyss, he went straight to the North Underworld continent. This time, he had no more worries. Just now that he had passed the 2-boundary mountain, he released all of his qi activity. Instantly, it was as if the world had turned upside down. Along the way, his noble qi surged and his mana spread. Everywhere he passed, the continent beneath him cracked, mountains and rivers collapsed, and everything was broken. When the enlightened masters of the various sects in the Donghua continent saw this scene, including the people from the Yuxiao school, they were all shocked. This was the true might of an enlightened master of a heavenly abode. With a wave of their hands and feet, they could shatter the sky, crack the earth, and collapse the mountains. However, among the enlightened masters of the world, no one had ever used their fists and feet so unscrupulously in the past due to their restraints. Some people were shaken by the sight, unable to control themselves. There were even people who were envious. How great is this? So what if I've been restrained here for 3,000 years? Instead of enduring it bitterly, I'd rather go beyond the world and be free and unfettered. At this moment, Zhang Yan freely used his mana. He felt an unprecedented sense of freedom in his heart. He vaguely felt that some shackles in his heart had been loosened. After passing the Tsong River, he looked around and saw a huge mountain. He took a deep breath, landed, and stood with his sleeves behind his back. At this moment, there was a broken continent in front of him and behind him. Between them, a vast ocean surged up and down, as if the boundless world had all gathered here. The waves of the world rolled over. After a while, he took the divine beast egg and placed it on the peak of the mountain with a rumble, allowing it to absorb the spiritual qi of the world. Then, he looked in the direction of the Yujun Palace and shouted, "Zhang Yan of the Qinsong School is here. Do you dare to come out and fight me?" To be continued. Chapter 1173. When Zhang Yan said this, his voice reverberated through the clouds and shook the surroundings. However, after waiting for a long time, there was no response. He smiled coldly and did not force it. When the divine beast beside him came out and absorbed all the spiritual energy in the continent, he would be able to break open the Lord Yuanjun Palace easily. But all of a sudden, he felt an aura descend upon him. He raised his brows and tried, but realized that it was difficult to move through the void. He knew that it must be because of that mysterious technique. However, even if he did not move, he still had the sword with him. He could come and go as he pleased, so he did not take it to heart. At that moment, many pairs of eyes in the continent looked over. Although there was no battle yet, everyone knew that the battle that would decide the fate of heaven and earth was about to begin. In the Lord Yuanjun Palace, the 4 demon marquises were sitting in the hall. However, all of their expressions were solemn, and none of them dared to go out to fight. At that moment, an attendant came over and said, "The king sent me to ask why the demon court is being bullied, and even the continent is broken. Why aren't the 4 of you fighting?" Li Fu, the leader of the ape tribe, replied, "It is a matter of life and death. Tell the king not to panic. You can report to the king that this is the Qinsong School Hall Master Duzhen. He is not someone that ordinary grotto heavens can compare to. We don't know if there are any hidden reinforcements. If we go out, we will fall into their trap." The attendant said, "I am just passing on the message. If I offended you, I hope the 4 of you won't be offended." With that he bowed and left. Yan Huiguang could not help but say, "Are we really going to wait here?" Li Fu smiled bitterly. "The Qinsong School has nothing to worry about now. How can we fight against them alone? I have already sent a letter to Yu Xiao, and I just need to wait for a reply." In the Yu Xiao School Hall, Zhenren Kongjing flicked the letter and said, "In the letter, he said that if we don't save him, we can only join the Qinsong School." Shang Shooting said, "How dare that demon forget his words?" Zhenren Kongjing said, "If this was before, we don't have to care. But after the Qinsong School spread the news, its fate is one with me, so I have to save him." Tan Dingxian looked towards the north and sneered, "There are 4 demon grotto heavens in the Lord Yuanjun Palace after all. Luo Mingze and Chu Yu are also powerful, yet no one is willing to fight?" Taoist Master Bai Bai said, "Of course. Just now, the announcement from Yu Tsong's sect clearly told the world that they are abandoning the world. They don't care about the spirit cave. On the other hand, that group of demon cultivators is still thinking about how to protect the second half of the continent. If they go out and take action, they might be affected if they're not careful." Chu Rui said plainly, "One side has their hands and feet tied, while the other side has nothing to fear. Before the battle has even started, the winner has already been decided. Huang Yugong from the Nanhua sect was defeated by Zhang Yan, so he could deduce Zhang Yan's ability." Zhenren Kongjing said, "The Qinsong School's Hall Master Du Zhen is really good. It is a good thing that the demon cultivator doesn't dare to fight, so I can make arrangements. Who do you think should go?" Zhenren Kongjing said, "Hall Master Du Zhen from the Qinsong School is good." Bai Bai Palace Lord stood up and said, "Palace Lord Exenming can go." On the other side, Wu Yunqing said, "Peak Master Exenming can go. But if he goes now, it will take a while to get from the south to the north. I'm afraid that Zhang Zhenren has other tricks up his sleeve. He won't be able to make it." Reverend Kong Zheng's gaze shifted, looking at the sect leaders. These people naturally understood. However, even the Jade Firmament cultivators had personally come to the rescue, so it was only right for them to send more people. Shang Shooting said, "Since our sects are closer, Tai Hao is willing to send one." Xiao Lingyun said, "Nanhua is also willing to send one." Chu Rui thought for a while. Since every sect had sent people he, Yuan Yang, couldn't reject. Just as he was thinking about who to send, Zhenren Kongjing said, "4 is enough." Chu Rui frowned and looked at him. He knew what he was planning. If Yuan Yang didn't send people now, he wouldn't be able to reject if his subordinates had something to ask of him. However, in Yuan Jun's palace, the 4 demon marquises couldn't sit still even before the cultivators from the sects came to help. Anyone could see that the spiritual vigor was flowing towards the divine beast egg, as though it was swallowing the spiritual vigor of the entire continent. It felt like there was a huge gap in heaven and earth, causing the qi dynamic to leak out continuously. Bat tribe leader Yan Huiguang was shocked. What is that? How can it absorb spiritual vigor? Li Fu grabbed his beard. It looks like an egg. Chu Yu's face darkened. It doesn't matter what it is. If this goes on, the palace formation will lose its spiritual vigor sooner or later. By then, not to mention that the palace formation can be easily broken, even the last bit of spiritual vigor in the North Underworld continent will be gone. By then we will be stray dogs. We must not let it be born. We need to go out and break this thing immediately. Li Fu looked like he was in a difficult position. He struggled, but Yu Xiao told me to do my best. He will send people to help. Don't you want to wait for a while? Chu Yu said angrily, how can we make it in time? He pointed outside and said, look at that thing, it will take at most an hour to swallow all the spiritual vigor. By the time Yu Xiao school sends people here, it will be too late. Yan Huiguang said, that's right, with all our magical weapons, the 4 of us together, we might not lose to this person. However, there was still one person who didn't speak. Chu Yu turned around and asked, what does Marquis Luo say? Luo Mingze was silent for a moment. He sighed. We will die if we go, we will also die if we don't go, we will go with you. Yan Huiguang's expression changed. He scolded, how can Marquis Luo say such disheartening words? Luo Mingze ignored him, shook his sleeves and walked out. The 3 of them looked at each other. This wasn't the time to argue about such things. They had to work together in order to resolve the crisis. At this moment, Zhang Yan stood beside the divine beast egg. As the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth poured in, this thing became bigger and bigger. It actually grew to a height of 100 feet. This mountain peak was gradually unable to contain it. At this moment, he suddenly felt an extremely strong aura rising from the opposite side. His eyes flashed. He turned his head and saw 4 rays of light coming towards him. He snorted coldly, finally can't hold it in. Suddenly he felt a strong consciousness from the dark north heavenly sword at his waist, as if it felt the demonic qi. It couldn't wait to slash out. He said, Dark North Spiritual Master, please wait for a moment. None of these demons can think of escaping today. Li Fu and the other 3 knew that this was a battle of life and death. They didn't dare to be careless. Flying into the sky, they each activated their dharma. In the span of a few breaths. However, they didn't charge at the same time. One person was in front, while the other 3 flanked him from both sides. It looked like they wanted to surround him from all sides. However, in Zhang Yan's eyes, although the 4 demons came with a fierce momentum, they didn't seem to have the determination to die. They were more focused on opposing the divine beast egg. They obviously didn't want to fight him to the death. They just wanted to destroy this thing as soon as possible. He laughed coldly in his heart. To still have the thought of getting lucky in front of me, you all deserve to die. With a command in his mind, the clear swan sword pellet instantly flew out. Like a cold light exploding, there were countless sword lights shooting in all directions. Sword weapon of slaughter? The 4 were terrified. Although they surrounded him, they were forced by the sword force. They couldn't care about attacking. Instantly, they were flustered, and only had the strength to defend. Zhang Yan stood in the raging wind that was blowing towards him. He looked over and saw that the enemy in front of him was the clan leader of the Bat tribe, Yan Huiguang. With a turn of his divine will, Xian Qi gathered above his head and turned into a huge hand. With a bang, it slammed towards him. Because he no longer needed to restrain any of his magic power, this palm strike was truly all-encompassing. The 4 felt the sky above them darkening, and when they looked up, they saw a heavy curtain of clouds pressing down, that kind of aura. It was as if the sky was collapsing. Yan Huiguang hurriedly pointed in front of him, blowing out a formless wind, intending to break that huge hand, but when he hit it, it was like a stone hitting the sea. There wasn't a single wave. He hurriedly retreated. After that, he received 3 consecutive supernatural powers, and realized that they were all difficult to break. His face instantly turned ugly. This, Taishian Qi 5 Elements Big Hand, was created by Zhang Yan to deal with the true weapon, as long as one didn't understand the profound mystery within, or couldn't break it in one blow. No matter how many supernatural powers came, it wouldn't be broken. Yan Huiguang had no choice. He gritted his teeth, and could only reveal his original form, which was a grayish-white bat. He roused all the mana in his body, and went up to collide with it. With a loud bang, it was like a mayfly trying to shake a tree, and with a wail, he retreated. He realized that he couldn't fight against his opponent, and he didn't have any thoughts of fighting. He wanted to jump out from the surrounding area that was covered by the big hand, but at this moment, his body stopped, and he was fixed by an invisible Qi dynamic. He shouted, "Oh no," and hurriedly used another supernatural power, but this time, he shrunk his body from 10,000 feet to the size of a rice grain, thinking that he could use this to escape. However, Zhang Yan's mana had long reached the stage of refinement, and with just a little bit, the power of the whole big hand could be released at once. With a boom, the palm hit, and Yan Huiguang's body exploded, and then he was hit by the boundless force, and couldn't even reassemble his body. Before he landed on the ground, he had already disappeared, and his soul scattered. Seeing this, the 3 demons exclaimed, "Mar Yan!" Just now, the 2 of them were fighting, and although it was only a short moment, it involved many subtle changes, and was definitely not as simple as it looked on the surface. But in the eyes of outsiders, it wasn't so. With 1 palm from Zhang Yan, a person from the heavenly abode was killed, and it could be said to be extremely cruel. Zhang Yan wanted to end the battle quickly, and didn't want to be entangled. After killing Yan Huiguang with 1 palm, he took out the North Dark Sword, and a black rainbow rose up, turning into a sword light that almost cut the heavens. The tip of the sword turned, and it slashed towards Li Fu, who was at the side. The latter was horrified, and he cried out, "Monster-slaying sword?" He was about to dodge, but the light on the sword flashed, and he felt his breath stagnate. The mana in his body was incomparably difficult, and at this moment, he couldn't use his supernatural power anymore. He could only watch as the sword light fell, and from head to toe, he was cut into 2. Blood light sword, and with a boom, his whole body exploded into clear air. The sword light's momentum did not diminish, and it slashed the remaining half of the North Underworld continent into 2. Thus, water vapor, waves, clouds, and smoke mixed together and rose into the sky. When one looked up, there was only a vast expanse. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, Chu Yu turned and ran. Luo Mingze hesitated, and with a sigh, he retracted his dharma. This battle was seen by the whole world, but in less than a dozen breaths, Zhang Yan had already killed 2 enlightened masters, and the other 2 collapsed without a fight. This kind of battle power made the hearts of the enlightened masters tremble, and they were shocked. A beam of light fell, and Zhang Yan held the North Dark Sword in his hand. With a flick of his sleeve, he swept away the dust and water in front of him, and stepped on the smoke with his sword. Standing on the clouds, he looked at Luo Mingze, and said, "Why didn't Luo Ho escape?" Luo Mingze said indifferently, "Enlightened Master has the killing true sword, I can't escape, so why do I have to be so panicky?" Zhang Yan looked at him, and seeing that he didn't look back, he said indifferently, "If Luo Ho is willing to commit suicide, I can allow your spirit to escape." When he finished, he didn't say anything more, and his body turned into a sword rainbow and chased after Chuyu. Luo Mingze let out a long sigh, and then a look of determination appeared in his eyes. With a swish, he pulled out his sword and held it horizontally to his neck. After standing still for a moment, his body fell down. Just now, not long after Zhang Yan fled, he heard a loud sound behind him. He didn't even turn his head, and the rainbow light sped up again, chasing after the escaping light in front of him, leaving behind a large expanse of rolling clear air. To be continued. Chapter 1174. Chu Yu mustered up all his energy to escape. He could only hide in the Lord Yuan Palace, which might be able to buy him some time. At this moment, his thoughts were still unusually calm. He thought that with Zhang Yan's strength, Yuxiao School might not keep their promise and send reinforcements. However, if no one came, he could just give up on the North Darkstar continent and escape overseas through a sea channel under Guiyuan Jun Palace. In the battle between Yuxiao and Qinsong School, any combat power was indispensable. This palace master Zhang would not chase him across the ocean just for him. However, before he could get far, he felt a chill behind him. He turned around and saw that the sword gleam was already right behind him. In a few breaths, it would catch up. However, since he had chosen to escape, how could he not know that the other party's sword escape technique was far better than his own escape technique? Therefore, he had prepared a backup plan. Whether or not he could pull it off depended on his own luck. After the two of them flew away, a ray of spiritual light flew out from the water where the divine beast egg was placed. It was a shadow clone that Chu Yu had left there. He came closer and raised his hand. A ray of light rose from his palm and pressed down on it. He did not hide his chi dynamic, nor did he move quickly. This was not hesitation, but to let Zhang Yan notice so that he would come back to protect him and give up on chasing his real body. Luo Ho has lost his will to fight. How pitiful! If he works with me, we can destroy this egg even if we can't. After thinking about it, he pressed his hand on it and his mana landed on the egg. Other than stirring up a cloud of water vapor and smoke, there was no trace left. He was shocked. He knew that this thing was more powerful than he had imagined. If he did not use his full strength, he would not be able to do anything. He looked back and saw that Zhang Yan had no intention of coming back to save him. He was still chasing his real body. He knew that he could not lure him back. He scoffed. Even so, as long as he could destroy this thing, the Lord Yuan Palace could still be saved. The North Darkstar continent's spiritual opportunity could still be preserved. Therefore, he did not hold back and retreated a few miles away. With a loud shout, he did not hesitate to activate all the magic power of this clone. His entire body turned into a beam of divine light, and with the momentum of rolling thunder, he fiercely smashed into the divine beast egg. The mountain that supported the egg crumbled. It turned into countless stone shards that sank into the ocean below. However, when the light dissipated, the surface of the egg was still smooth and clean, as though the impact did not affect it at all. Although it fell from the sky into the ocean, the speed at which it absorbed spiritual opportunity was not any slower than just now. While pursuing Chu Yu, Zhang Yan had also sensed the commotion behind him. However, if the egg could be so easily destroyed, how could he abandon it and not care about it? Looking over, he saw that Chu Yu's streak of light wasn't far away. With a thought, a sword light flew out of his body and slashed over. Chu Yu had been on high alert. Feeling a sense of foreboding, he immediately rolled to the side and the red cloak on his body swirled. Although the cloak was destroyed by the sword light, it was still able to slightly block the sword light. At the same time, he waved his hand and summoned a copper mace, which turned into a ray of golden light that shot toward Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan did not bother, turning the light around and going around it. With a command, the sword light turned into hundreds of streaks in the sky. They were sharp and were about to land. Chu Yu was shocked. Luckily, he had been flying along the coast. Seeing that he had no other choice, he shook his body and turned into a 10,000 feet long carp with a horn on its head. He dove into the water. He wanted to use the water to escape. Zhang Yan secretly scoffed. This Chu Yu was a member of the water tribe, and was only one step away from transforming from a carp to a dragon. If it was any other time, he would have to go through some trouble to catch up to him once he fell into the sea. But it was different now. He reached into his sleeves and grabbed onto the dragon's soul essence. He channeled his spiritual power into it, and with a slight movement, the seawater in all directions froze in an instant. He then pointed with his fingers, raising the dark north heavenly sword into the air before pointing it downwards. In an instant, a beam of mysterious light descended, and with a loud bang, a huge crack appeared in the seawater below. Chu Yu was caught within, unable to escape in time, and was struck by the sword light. His body trembled and his huge body flipped over. After a few breaths of time, his entire body exploded, turning into balls of surging clear air that stirred up tens of thousands of waves. Zhang Yan waved his hand and the dark north sword landed. After holding it, he put it back into his sleeves. Outside of Yuan Jun's palace, only 1,000 miles of land remained. Because the surrounding mountains had been destroyed and the water had flowed in reverse, it looked like a lone island. At this moment, the 4 demon marquises who came out to fight were all dead. Other than a demon court that existed in name, there was nothing left in the northern nether continent that had survived since the ancient times. He looked up at the sky and could clearly feel that his aura was much lighter than before. He thought to himself coldly, although we have turned the tables a little, our fate is still not enough. Yu Xiao School has taken the initiative. But it doesn't matter. I can just kill a few more people. Once the divine beast is born, I will bring it to Donghua continent and attack Taihao School's mountain gate. Let's see if Yu Xiao will save it. On Mo Chiu Cliff, Tan Dingxian drew in a cold breath. He pointed and said, "This person's battle ability, I wonder how many of us can match up to him." Chu Rui's expression was solemn. The battle ability that Zhang Yan had displayed in his eyes was not much weaker than a 3rd-degree cultivator. Xiao Lingyun said, "As long as this person is alive, he will be a great threat to me. Why don't sect leader Tan use Xian technique to attack him?" Tan Dingxian was in a difficult position. The Xian technique in his hands was powerful, but it was best used as a deterrent. If he used it, there would no longer be any hindrance to Qinsong School. It was originally a technique to attack many people, but it was not worth it to use it on one person. But it seemed inappropriate to ignore it. He could only cast a questioning look at Jinren Kongjing. Seeing the latter shake his head slightly, he kept his thoughts. Bai Palace Master bowed and said, "Since the 4 demon marquises are dead, should we call the few Zenrins back?" Jinren Kongjing said firmly, "Since we have already gone out, we must not retreat halfway. Otherwise, we will admit that we have lost, and our morale will be affected." Xiao Lingyun said, "That's right. If we can kill Zhang Yan, not only will our fate not be reduced, we can also weaken Qinsong School." Bai Palace Master said, "But this person is not easy to deal with. He also has 2 killing weapons, the 4 of you may not be able to win." Jinren Kongjing thought for a moment and raised his head to look at Chu Rui. He raised his hands and bowed. "Now that things have come to this, I can only ask sect leader Chu to come back and end this person." Chu Rui did not agree immediately. Instead, he thought for a moment and said, "I can come back, but I have a condition. The 4 of you must listen to my orders." Jinren Kongjing was slightly startled. He thought for a moment and nodded, "Sure, I will send a letter later and inform them. Sect leader Chu is of high status, and now that we are facing a great enemy, I think no one will dare to disrespect you." Chu Rui got his promise and stood up. "That's good." He bowed to the people at the table and strode out of the pavilion. He stood up and turned into a golden light, flying to the northern sky. About an hour later, the 4 Taoist Zenrins who were on the way received the letter and knew that Chu Rui was rushing over. They ordered him not to attack rashly, which was exactly what they wanted. Just now, Zhang Yan had killed 4 Yao cultivation caves. They saw it with their own eyes and were terrified. Although they usually looked down on those Yao cultivation caves, they understood that, regardless of their background, their cultivation was definitely not weak. Even if they were to fight against any one of them, they would not be defeated so easily. Jinren Shi of Taihao School and Yuan Wang of Nanhua School had left first, so they had already gathered together. Jinren Shi said, "My sect leader sent a letter, asking me to listen to sect leader Chu's orders. How is your side?" Yuan Wang said, "It's just so-so." Jinren Shi said, "Sect leader Chu's cultivation is not weak, but we are not cultivators under his sect. Doing this is not appropriate." Yuan Wang knew what he meant. Jinren Shi was afraid that Chu Rui would use them. In fact, he had this worry. He thought for a while and said, "The order has been given. Are we going to disobey it? Just be careful later." After waiting for a while, they saw 3 golden rainbows coming from the horizon. The 2 of them looked at each other and knew that the other party had arrived. Above the floating heavenly palace, Meng Zhen suddenly felt something was wrong. He stood up and looked to the south. He said in a low voice, "It's Yuan Yang sect leader Chu Rui. I didn't expect him to come out. Looks like he's coming for Hall Master Du Jin." Everyone in the palace was moved. Yu Zhao's side had already lost 4 Xianmen cultivators. Their divine arts and Taoist arts were not comparable to those demon cultivators. Since they were here to fight, they might be carrying a true weapon. This was not easy to deal with. If they were to add Chu Rui, a cultivator who cultivated his Yuan Fu, this kind of momentum was not something that a cultivator under the third realm could handle. Qi Yuntian bowed and said, "Sect leader Jinren, Hall Master Du Jin might not be able to deal with him alone. Can we use that Xianshu to stop him?" There was a Xianshu in Qinsong School called Milky Way Far. It could turn a flat road into a natural moat. As long as this technique was not used, no matter how one walked, one would not be able to reach the other side. If it was used, Chu Rui and the 4 cultivators could only wander on the road if they did not have a way to break it. Meng Zhen thought for a while and said, "Honored Master, do you need me to stop Sect Leader Chu?" Sect Leader Qin said, "Hall Master Du Zhen is outside. He has his own ideas. Just inform him about this." Meng Zhen bowed and said, "Yes, disciple will do it now." He took out a spell and sent a message to Zhang Yan and said, "Yuan Yang Sect's Chu Rui and the 4 cultivators are rushing towards Hall Master Du Zhen. This time, it is not a sword duel. They might join hands. What should Hall Master Du Zhen do?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "This may be an opportunity for me, Qingting. If Chu Rui comes, I will fight with him. Moreover," he took a look at the 10,000 feet tall divine beast's egg in the sea, "I am not alone." To be continued. You can read the following chapters in full. Chapter 1175. Up in the sky, Chu Rui had already gathered with the 4. However, he did not rush to fight with Zhang Yan immediately. Instead, he began to discuss countermeasures. "I have been entrusted by Jinren Kongjing and the heads of the other sects to kill Zhang Yan. If he escapes, it will not be considered a success. Therefore, I need your help." He was, after all, a head of a sect, a cultivator who had cultivated his natal embryo. Even though the 4 of them were not from the same sect, they still had the courtesy on the surface and bowed. Wu Yunbi said, "Since we are under orders from the sect, we will obey whatever head Chu has to say." Chu Rui knew that he wanted to help and nodded to him. Then he said to everyone present, "Zhang Yan is an expert in the art of sword escape. Even if he is no match for us, he can still escape easily. He must have something like this to rely on. Even though he knows we are coming, he still stays where he is." Yuni Weng said, "That might not be the case. From what I can see, the thing that Zhang Yan is carrying is similar to a legendary egg. This thing needs to be nourished before it can be born. Presumably, he is waiting there for it to be born." Chu Rui said, "If that is the case, isn't it perfect? I wonder if Jinren Yuan can determine when that thing will be born and what abilities it has?" Yuni Weng said, "This is hard to say. From what I see, when the spiritual vigor of North Darkstar Continent is consumed by it, it will be the time for it to be born. From the looks of it, it will be in about 1 or 2 days. As for what state it can reach, it depends on how long it has existed, where it is nurtured, and how much spiritual vigor it can absorb when it is born. If it has all 3, it will be much more powerful than us." Chu Rui's eyes shone and he said in a low voice, "So, this thing is also on the list to be destroyed." Yuni Weng said, "This is useless. It was with the help of that Zhang Jinren that it was able to appear in the world, then the fate of the 2 sides has already merged together. As long as that Zhang Jinren does not die, or his fate is not exhausted, then this item cannot be destroyed. Just now, Demon Marquis Chu you had attacked with his clone, so it is useless." Chu Rui looked forward and said, "Then this person has one more reason to kill. Otherwise, the fate of Qinsong School will be even more prosperous." He could feel it. Although the 4 members of the demi-human court had died in succession, the momentum of their advance had already slowed. This meant that the enemy was catching up. Jinren Shi and Yuan Qi Weng looked at each other, cupped their fists and said, "The enemy is right in front of us. What should we do? Chu Zhong'an, please tell us." Chu Rui said, "There are 5 of us. If we make the first move, we will have to cut off his path of retreat." Jinren Shi frowned and said, "This is not easy." Using the sword escape technique, he would be able to escape in an instant. Cutting off the path of retreat was easy to say, but it was very difficult to do. Sword cultivators of that level were extremely perceptive. Once they sensed danger, they would be able to escape first. But before they could do this, the enemy would have already escaped. Chu Rui said, "It's not easy, but I have the dual pole magnetic gold leak that I have specially refined. As long as it is within a few thousand li, it can disrupt his sword escape technique and sword light, forcing him to fight me head-on." Yuan Yang sect had always wanted to be the fourth largest sect in the Taoist sections. This wasn't just empty words. After he became the sect master, he had been thinking about how to deal with the cultivators of the three sects one day. He hadn't just prepared this kind of item to deal with sword cultivators for a day or two. Jinrenshi's eyes brightened and he said, "Oh, if that's the case, our chances of victory will increase greatly." Those who were good at sword escape technique could use the method of guerrilla warfare to deal with many enemies. Although there were 5 of them, once the sword escape technique came and went. Because its speed was too fast, in a short period of time, there was only one person fighting against it. In reality, there was only one person fighting against it, so it was impossible for them to work together. If the sword escape was blocked, then the power it could display would be greatly reduced. Chu Rui said, "When we fight later, leave the front to me. You guys only need to help from the side. The key is to not let him escape." The 4 of them nodded. There was nothing wrong with this arrangement. Since Chu Rui took the initiative to share the main pressure, they had nothing to say. After the 5 of them discussed the details for a while, they moved again towards the North Nether continent. However, if they went straight north, they would have to pass through the boundary of Qinsong School. They didn't dare to do that. Previously, when they went east to cross the sea, they had to take a detour. Zhang Yan stood in front of Yuan Jun's palace and looked at the majestic palace. The demon king in the palace was still unwilling to come out and surrender even at this stage. It seemed like he still had hope for Jade Cloud sect. However, he didn't care. Even if the chi of all the small sects and demons in the world were added together, it wouldn't be as good as a Zhenren of a grotto heaven. The final deciding factor was still the grotto heaven of each sect. As long as the divine beast beside him appeared, he could leave this place. However, before that, there was one more thing that needed to be resolved. He turned to look towards the south and his eyes flashed. "They're here." A white line appeared in the sky, followed by the sound of thunder. It was the 5 Xianmen cultivators who stirred up the spiritual tide of heaven and earth when they were traveling. The wind and clouds above were dispersed, and the waves below were surging. Zhang Yan turned around unhurriedly and slowly rose into the sky. In the sound of his clothes fluttering, he held the North Sea upside down. He stood alone in the void, surrounded by Qinghong's sword gleam. Seeing that the people were approaching, he raised his hand very slowly. The North Sea sword gradually trembled, and wisps of mysterious light like water floated on the sword's body. Since an hour ago, he had been constantly pouring mana into it. However, this sword that had existed for an unknown number of years, and had become the demon-slaying sword in the hands of the previous leader of Qinsong School, was like a bottomless abyss that could never be filled. Just now, there was some response. He first squinted at the 5 rays of light that were looking at him, and then his expression turned solemn. With a clear shout, he swung his sleeves and brought the North Sea sword out into the sky. His gaze followed and watched as the shadow of the sword flew away, climbing higher and higher. It seemed that after a long time, he heard a whistle of the sword in the distance, and then the whole world darkened and flashed. Then, a beam of mysterious light that seemed to connect the heavens and the earth shot out and slashed downwards. Seeing this, the expressions of the 5 changed. At this moment, they had a feeling of impending disaster. It seemed that no matter where they hid, they would be affected by the sword light. And under the effect of motionless circumference, it was impossible for them to move elsewhere even if they wanted to. Chu Rui was indeed a cultivator who had cultivated Yuanzi. At this time, he took the initiative to stand out. He shouted, "All of you, stand behind me." Wu Yunbi did not hesitate, and was the first to do as he was told. Zhou Ruing was a step behind, and Shi and Yuan hesitated for a moment before choosing to follow. Chu Rui took out a piece of stone that was shaped like a green stone. It gave off a faint green light, and its surface was polished and shiny. He raised his hand to touch it, and a ray of light flew out. It protected everyone at the same time. This treasure was called Li Rongqing. It was a magical item that the Yuan Yang sect had kept for more than 1,000 years. It could absorb any external force into it. He had a jade pendant that was made from this item, but judging from the momentum of the sword light, the jade pendant might not be able to block it, so he could only take out this stone. After a breath or two, the sword light finally arrived, but when it slashed down, it was blocked by the green chi outside. The others looked over. There seemed to be countless tiny lightning bolts jumping around outside. Apart from that, they could not see anything clearly. In their senses, there was only chaos, as if there was an infinite amount of violent force wreaking havoc outside. At the same time, the Li Rongqing was continuously being consumed, and its color was fading at a speed visible to the naked eye. A trace of fear appeared in the eyes of the four people. If they were hit head-on, without magic treasures to protect themselves, they would probably lose their lives immediately. After an unknown period of time, the violent sword light outside finally stopped. Chu Rui swung his hand and threw out the Li Rongqing that had completely turned into dust. He pressed a hand on the magic sword at his waist and stared at the figure standing in the air in front of him. The other party was more difficult to deal with than he had imagined. Before the battle had even begun, the other party had already destroyed one of his most valuable treasures, which he had used to protect his life. The four heard the sound of surging tides behind them, and a hurricane swept over. They glanced sideways, and their expressions froze. Where the ordinary sword light passed, the entire sea that stretched to the horizon was shaved off a layer. At this moment, the seawater outside was pouring in, and this was just now. One could imagine, if they had not come from the east, with the boundless sea behind them, this sword light was probably enough to cut down the Donghua continent. Zhang Yan waved his hand and put away the North Dark Sword. He was not surprised that Chu Rui was able to block the attack that he had prepared for a long time without a scratch. This person was the head of the Yuan Yang sect, and he could use all the treasures and magic treasures of the sect. The person who fought with him was not just fighting against one person, but also against the foundation of the sect that had been passed down for thousands of years. Chu Rui's gaze rested on the North Dark Sword for a moment, then he stood up straight and said with a calm expression, "Everyone, this sword was prepared for him. It is not something that can be casually slashed out. This person is just trying to gain the upper hand with a show of strength. Don't be fooled by him." As he spoke, he was already moving forward. Seeing this, the four followed the previous plan and first flew into the sky, then in different directions. Chu Rui approached within 1,000 miles and did not encounter any obstruction. Here, he was relieved and no longer hid the spiritual vigor that the magnetic gold hourglass emitted. With this item, he was not afraid that Zhang Yan would take it off. Even if the other used the sword escape technique, he would be able to block it. After the other arrived, Zhang Yan clearly felt an inexplicable pressure from the Qinghong sword ball. Without thinking too much, this must be aimed at his advantage of the speed of the escape technique. Even if he raised his sword and slashed from afar, he might be restricted. This was also expected. The other would not be unprepared when fighting with him. If he used normal methods to fight with the other, he would only be countered. He laughed coldly in his heart. But if they could stop him like this, how could he have the confidence to stay and fight? With a glance, he saw that the 5 of them had already surrounded him from all directions. However, he was still standing at the same spot without moving. Chu Rui bowed to him and did not say anything. He took a few steps back and with a wave of his hand, tens of thousands of golden lights slashed down. This move of his was like a signal. The other 4 also used their mystiques and Dao techniques and attacked the place where Zhang Yan was. Zhang Yan looked up and his eyes flashed. Facing the attacks from all directions, he still stood in the same place, not dodging or evading. However, his eyebrows suddenly turned scarlet purple, like dancing flames. He stretched out his hand and slapped heavily. With a rumble, in an instant, with his body as the center, the entire void seemed to have collapsed. All the mystiques and Dao techniques that were attacking fell into it and then broke apart. At the same time, he suddenly shouted, "Boom!" The five felt as if something had exploded in their minds. Apart from Chu Ru, their bodies shook and they almost lost their balance. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, shook his sleeve and held the northern dark sword in his hand. With a stomp of his foot, he charged forward amidst the sonorous rumble. Chapter 1176. When Zhang Yan rushed over, Chu Rui was in front of him and bore the brunt of the attack. Seeing that the person was coming at him aggressively, his eyes narrowed, and he pointed with his finger. A magical sword flew out from his left and right side, turning into two flashes of golden light, shooting into the sky. Zhang Yan shouted, swinging his sleeve downwards. A sound of metal clashing rang out. Although one of the swords blocked the North Dark Sword, it could not withstand the force, and was sent flying far away. Basket. Color. At the same time, the other side's sword light made a sharp turn and attacked towards his back. Only the Qinghong sword pill that was revolving around his body sensed it and immediately leaped up, transforming into a clear rainbow and clashing with the sword light with a clang. Chu Rui's two swords also had a great history. One was the Great Yuan Sword of Righteousness, passed down by the founder of the Yuanyang sect, and had always been the sword token of the Yuanyang sect's leader. The other was the Bright God Questioning Sword, passed down by the sect's ascended Jinren Hongyu, and both had great power. These two swords were also sharp killing weapons. In this clash, although one of them was not a match for the North Dark Sword, it was not far off, and slightly blocked the momentum of Zhang Yan's attack. Chu Rui pointed in the air, raising the two swords, and once again entangled. Zhang Yan glanced at it, ignoring the two swords that were coming towards him. With a shout, he also raised the two swords in his hands and slashed towards Chu Rui. Chu Rui's expression changed slightly. Zhang Yan was obviously going to attack him. If he did not change his stance, then the two swords would definitely hit him. But if he withdrew his swords to protect himself, then he would lose the initiative and fall into a disadvantageous position. Needless to say, the opponent would definitely press forward. He could clearly feel that there seemed to be an inexplicable pulling force around Zhang Yan, and if he did not try to stabilize himself, he would fall into it. And as the two sides got closer, this feeling became stronger and stronger, so he did not dare to let Zhang Yan take the opportunity to get close. With a thought, one of his swords, halfway there, was lifted up, parrying the Dark North sword. As for the other sword, it still slashed down. The remaining two sword lights were unobstructed and struck their respective targets almost at the same time. A ray of light appeared on Chu Rui's body, isolating him from the sword qi. As for the jade pendant made by Li Rongqing, it cracked a little and his body froze for a moment. On Zhang Yan's body, a circle of rippling light appeared. Within it, there seemed to be a leaf's stem vein. With a gentle shake, the sword light was shaken off. However, the next moment, the two of them raised their swords at the same time and slashed at each other. Both of them were aware that at such a close distance, there were two killing weapons hovering above their heads. In order to defeat their opponents, any schemes and ingenious changes would be completely useless. The most effective and direct method was to not think too much and directly use the Imperial Sword to kill. Kill the enemy before they can break through your defenses. During this time, there couldn't be a moment of delay or hesitation. Because if they were a little slower, the opponent could slash one more sword or even several times, and that could decide the outcome. The two of them fought in close combat, their auras colliding. Xian Qi and golden light spread out, shaking the surroundings and causing the sky to change color. For streaks of sword light slashed back and forth. For a moment, there was only the sound of swords tearing through the air. At this moment, the expressions of the four people outside changed. Since they'd stepped into the Tao, they'd never seen such a ferocious and intense battle. In order to avoid being affected by the two of them, they unconsciously retreated a little. They originally wanted to help, But firstly, the two of them moved extremely quickly and were close to each other. In order to avoid accidentally injuring each other, they couldn't act rashly. Secondly, Chu Rui hadn't called for help yet, so they were afraid that he had some sort of plan. They were afraid that if they rashly went forward, they would ruin the plan. So after thinking about it, they decided to stay where they were. However, they held onto their spells and treasures so that they could react at any time. After Chu Rui blocked another sword, the jade pendant on his body cracked and shattered. It was completely useless. He couldn't help but frown. However, as a sect leader, he naturally couldn't only have this item to protect him. The sect leader robe that he wore was also a defensive treasure. Even though the other party was Qinsong School's Hall Master Duzhen, he didn't believe that the protective treasure that the other party had could be compared to his. At this moment he turned his eyes and glanced at the Qinghong sword ball. He had the two poles magnetic gold leak with him. As long as the other party used the light-splitting sword technique, he could immediately cast a spell to make them fight each other and mess up the other party's moves. At this moment, he could use the sword to attack fiercely. He could even call the four of them to attack together. If everything went smoothly, he could severely injure the other party. If not, he could still suppress the attack. At least he wouldn't be in a battle where there was no room for turning back. However, Zhang Yan seemed to be aware of this. Even now, he was still moving his sword as one without any openings. Even the magnetic gold hourglass could only suppress the speed of his sword light, but was unable to move it. Both sides fought back and forth. After a dozen breaths, the magic robe on Chu Rui gradually lost its luster under the wear and tear of the sword qi. He turned his eyes and saw that the golden light on Zhang Yan's body didn't diminish at all under the alternating slashes of the two killing swords. This really surprised him. He thought, this is good too. If I don't wear down the protective treasure on his body, I won't be able to hurt him. After another few breaths, the magic robe on Chu Rui finally couldn't bear the burden and was slashed apart by the Qinghong sword ball. At this moment, he shook his body, and there were two rays of light hanging down from the magic crown. They were like weeping willows and stopped the sword light again. At the same time, he didn't hold back and pointed with two fingers. He controlled the sword light and returned the attack. The two of them fought in midair with their murderous sword qi. The spectators' eyelids twitched as they watched. This was a battle where both of them had given up on all their supernatural powers and Taoist techniques, and it was purely a battle of immortal treasures. As long as one side's foundation was slightly weaker, they would immediately be minced by the sword light. After about an hour, the protective treasure on Chu Rui's body was almost used up. However, he could also see that the treasure on Zhang Yan's body was also at its limit. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. If he had one more treasure, he might be able to hold on until the situation turned around. However, it didn't seem to be possible now. He had to think of a way to escape. Under the intertwining and slashing of the two sword lights, it wasn't easy to escape. He had to pay a price. After the cultivators of the heavenly abode had cultivated their nascent embryo, they could transform into several yang spirit bodies, like themselves. And the Yuan-Yang sect had a secret technique that could absorb the true law body into a ball of Yuan-Yang qi. At the moment of danger, they could turn into a rainbow and escape, leaving only their doppelgangers in place. However, the doppelgangers weren't endless. There were at most 5 or 6. He controlled his sword and two swords flew out, blocking the two swords in front of him. However, the Qinghong sword ball was still fine, but the North Dark sword couldn't resist and was instantly knocked away. However, this moment was enough. He pinched his fingers and took out a spell. There seemed to be a spiritual light appearing on his body. At this moment, the sword light in front of him had already fallen. With a flash, it fell down and cut him in half. With a rumble, the clear qi exploded. However, a golden light flew 100 miles away with lightning speed. The figure transformed again and said, "Fellow Taoists, this is the chance. Let's attack together." Zhang Yan saw that he was using the doppelgangers to block the swords and took the opportunity to escape. His eyes flashed. So what if there were doppelgangers blocking? He could kill them once, twice, or even 3 times. It all depended on how many doppelgangers there were. He used his mana and with a leap, he chased after Chu Rui. At this moment, boom boom boom, 3 consecutive sounds were heard. 3 rays of purple light hit the heaven and earth leaf. The treasure was already a little tired, and now it couldn't help but tremble slightly. Jade Jasper Purple Sun Seed. He raised his eyebrows. Although this level of attack couldn't destroy the treasure, if it continued, it would be at the cost of damaging the treasure. If he didn't have any other methods, he wouldn't mind doing this. As long as it didn't really damage the foundation, he could just refine it later. However, he had a strong body, so it wouldn't be a problem even without the protection of the treasure. Hence, he summoned it and kept it in his chi acupoint to nourish. In the past, he never let others hit him easily. Firstly, it was because he had the ability to dodge, so there was no need for him to get hit. Secondly, it was a method to hide his strength. Now that he was in the human tribulation, he should use it when he needed to. Otherwise, what was the point of having a strong body? A light flashed in the corner of his eyes and he saw a dozen more lights coming over. They looked like the golden thorns of the Jade Sky sect. He waved his sleeves and with a rumble, he sent them flying. He chased after Chu Rui and ignored the others. It was like he didn't care about them at all. Wu Yunbi frowned and said, "I don't know what kind of supernatural power this person has cultivated. It's hard to suppress him alone. Why don't we work together?" Everyone nodded. Zhou Ruing secretly used his mana, and the star beads behind him floated up. At the same time, a golden thorn appeared and disappeared beside him. Jinren Shi grabbed another 3 purple jade sun seeds. Yuan Yiweng took out a magical ring with the sharp teeth of several strange beasts strung on it. Just by holding it like that, the murderous aura spread out and was hard to suppress. Wu Yunbi also held a ball of smoke in his palm. His eyes followed Zhang Yan's figure. When he saw the opportunity, he shouted, "Now!" The 4 of them became serious and attacked at the same time. Almost in an instant, all the attacks landed on Zhang Yan's body. With a rumbling sound, he was instantly engulfed by a clump of black smoke. The seawater below was affected by this, forming a whirlpool that was a few thousand miles wide. Subsequently, endless dust and steam surged up together with the rising mist. Everyone waved their hands and kept their treasures. Jinren Shi heaved a sigh of relief. He stroked his beard and said, "If this person didn't have the protective treasure he had just now, he would have been seriously injured even if he didn't die from this attack." Wu Yunbi was about to speak, but at this moment he seemed to feel something. His expression froze and he stared down. He saw a dot of light rise up from the smoke, and then with a rumble it exploded outwards. 2 rays of sword light. Within the dark clouds of steam, Zhang Yan held the North Dark Sword. His entire body was covered in a layer of murderous aura, and there were rays of light revolving around him. Stepping on the smoke, he walked out step by step. He looked completely unharmed. He didn't even look at the other 4, and only turned to Chu Rui. The latter's expression also changed slightly. At this moment, the sky suddenly darkened, and in the blink of an eye, the 2 rays of sword light once again appeared in front of him. To be continued. You can read the following chapters in full. Chapter 1177. When Chu Rui saw the sword light coming again, he suddenly changed his mind, and the 2 killing swords on his side flew up again. Just now, although the 4 people didn't hurt Zhang Yan, they had bought him some time. The Yuan embryo in the Dharmakaya moved, and a doppelganger jumped out from behind him. It didn't rush up to attack, but took out a sign, and a huge steel flew out from behind him. On the steel, there were 2 swords, male and female, intertwining with each other. It was the sword steel of Yuanyang sect. This object was refined from a small piece of jade that was chiseled from the sect's treasure, the Xuanjiyang wall. When Qiao Zhengdao conquered the Devil's Cave, he brought one with him, but it had long been destroyed in a battle. This one, however, was personally refined by Chu Rui, and its power was naturally not comparable to that of the one from back then. As soon as it reached the outside, it emitted a glow that was like a sunset, and suddenly flew thousands of miles away, instantly taking his doppelganger and Zhang Yan into it. In order to prevent the boundary steel from being broken by the two killing swords, he didn't care about the damage to his two real swords, and forced them to entangle with the two swords to buy himself some time. Inside the boundary steel, as soon as Chu Rui's doppelganger arrived, his power suddenly increased by more than 30%. But he didn't fight with Zhang Yan, and didn't even do anything extra. He immediately used the fatal swords to attack. The sword steel was narrow and cramped, and there was no space to maneuver, and no place to hide. Under this sword he could only choose to face it head-on. This time, there were more than 1,000 fatal swords. It wasn't that Chu Rui couldn't use more. With his ability, he could release more than 10,000 swords if he didn't care about anything else. It was just that this boundary could only allow him to use so many swords, and he didn't use them all at once, but from all directions without leaving any gap. This sword was aimed at the opponent's chi, and as long as it hit the opponent's body, the opponent would definitely die. Zhang Yan looked at the flying swords coming from all directions. His eyes became a little sharper. Chu Rui had a way to restrain the flying swords, so how could he not be prepared for the divine sense of Yuanyang sect? He opened his hand and pushed outwards. Instantly, a glass-like barrier appeared around his body. It was the mysterious rotating heavenly net wall he had learned from Mu Shoshan. The fatal slaying swords were thrown in one after another, yet they were clearly falling in the direction of his body. However, they seemed to have been moved to another domain, and none of them hit their targets. Zhang Yan scoffed in his heart. There was no such thing as a method to break through it. This divine ability had already been broken by him. In front of this heavenly Luo wall, it didn't matter if there were 10, 100, 1,000, or 10,000 of them, it was all useless. At this moment, the demon's subduing slip in his brow moved. It seemed to be in a hurry to jump out. This thing had long been connected to his mind, and as soon as it sensed it, it immediately let go of its restraints. In an instant, he turned into a resplendent beam of light and shot out. Everywhere he passed, the killing swords were absorbed. However, after a few breaths of time, after absorbing about 100 of them, they returned to his body. Zhang Yan thought about it. He immediately understood the reason. This killing sword was formed from essence chi and spiritual sense. Before, the demon's subduing slip couldn't take it, but after the last transformation, its power had increased, so it could swallow some of it. However, now wasn't the time to look into it. Looking over, because Chu Rui's clone had used the killing technique, its vitality was greatly injured. It was faintly discernible and no longer had the ability to fight. He stomped his foot. With a rumble, everything around him collapsed. Not only did Chu Rui's clone shatter, but even the entire sword steel collapsed as well. Although Chu Rui's true body and Dharma body were outside restraining the two killing swords, he knew about the changes in the steel. He didn't expect to be able to kill Zhang Yan in one go, and only wanted to delay him. At this moment, when he sensed that the sword steel had broken, he immediately released his second backup plan. With a wave of his sleeve, a sword plate flew out. It seemed to be made of condensed light, with fine green light moving back and forth. From afar, it looked like overlapping waves, undulating. Once this item was unfolded, he could set up a sword formation. As long as he could trap Zhang Yan inside, even if it was only for a few breaths, he could pull the battle back to the rhythm he was good at. Ever since he started fighting with Zhang Yan, although he had never truly fallen into a disadvantageous position, he had always been led around by his opponent. Fortunately, he had managed to grab an opportunity earlier, and he firmly believed that from this moment onwards, he would be able to turn the situation around. However, in the instant that the sword plate was formed, the clear swan sword orb trembled and suddenly released a myriad of sword lights. They were prepared to accurately slash at each of the streaks of light that had been distributed, and the changes in the sword formation were forcibly delayed for an instant. Chu Rui's expression changed. He never thought that there would be such a change. The dual-pole origin magnetic gold leak could break the sword separation technique, but he had to use all his attention to control it. However, on one hand, he had to lay out the sword formation, on the other hand, he had to use all his strength to control the two swords to block. Naturally, he had let down his guard in this area. However, Just as he was about to turn the origin magnetic gold leak, the thousands of sword lights flashed and turned into one, instantly causing his efforts to be in vain. This timing was grasped perfectly, and it was as if he had completely calculated his response. In truth, since he had fought, he had dealt with everything appropriately. However, after all, he wasn't like Zhang Yan who killed his way over. If he was as experienced in battle as him, he definitely wouldn't have such a flaw. However, in battle, even a small mistake could cause the situation to turn around, much less 2 consecutive misses. Zhang Yan immediately grabbed this chance, charging out from the sword's steel. He summoned his 2 swords and slashed at Chu Rui. At the same time, he flicked his sleeve and a flat monster with gorgeous feathers flew out. It charged towards the Deyuan and God Ming swords. Chu Rui immediately knew that without the 2 swords by his side and without any protective treasures, he would definitely not be able to withstand it. At that moment, it was even more impossible for the 4 of them to save him. He was also a decisive person. He immediately abandoned another avatar and transformed into a golden light that flew over. The 2 swords landed and with a loud bang, his avatar exploded into a surging clear gas. Zhang Yan didn't let him off. He leaped up again and turned into a rainbow as he tore through the air and chased after him. At the same time, the demon severing sword collided with Chu Rui's 2 swords, but it couldn't help but let out a painful hiss. However, it had been repeatedly killed by the Qinghong sword pill and was no longer afraid of such injuries. There were only 2 additional wounds on its body. It was nothing. As long as it was given a breath or 2, it could close again. When the Deyuan and God Ming swords saw that they couldn't do anything to it, they soared into the sky and wanted to fly to their master's side. However, at that moment, the North Sea and Qinghong swords turned back under Zhang Yan's instructions and stopped them. The demon's severing sword hissed and grew its body. In an instant, it turned into 100,000 feet in size and covered the sky. Together with the 2 swords, it completely sealed off their escape route. Just as Zhang Yan was chasing, he suddenly sensed a bolt of lightning rushing towards him. He knew that the 4 of them had come to obstruct him again. He ignored them and continued forward. With a rumble, 4 rays of light landed on him, causing the mountains and seas to tremble. Flames burst in all directions and smoke billowed. However, amidst the loud noise, a ray of light didn't stop at all and crashed straight out. It actually couldn't stop him for even a moment. When Spiritual Master Shi and the other 3 saw this, their expressions turned solemn. Zhang Yan was more troublesome than they had imagined. No matter how they attacked, they couldn't do anything to him. Wu Yunbi took a glance at the demon's severing sword and said anxiously, "Elder Yuan, isn't your Nanhua sect good at capturing demons? Can that thing cure him? As long as the 2 swords are removed, we can help sect Master Chu out of this predicament." Yuan Yiwing shook his head with a bitter smile. He had cultivated in Nanhua sect for more than 2,000 years and believed that he could recognize all the birds and beasts in the world. However, he had never seen a living creature like this. The aura on its body was that of birds, beasts, insects, and fishes. It was as if many things were mixed together, so how could he deal with it? When Wu Yunbi saw that he couldn't do anything, he thought for a moment and said telepathically, "Sect Master Chu, it seems like this person also wants to kill me. It's good to increase his luck. Why don't we retreat to the East Sea and make it easier for me, Yu Xiao, to help him?" Although Chu Rui was a sect master, he had always listened to good advice. When he heard this, he immediately turned to the east. When Zhang Yan saw this, he smiled faintly and said, "Sect Master Chu, just now, it's such a great battle. You are a sect master, why do you want to retreat before the outcome is decided?" Chu Rui didn't answer. His identity was important, but he cared more about benefits. If his life was in danger, he would definitely leave. He definitely wouldn't stay and fight with his life for the sake of his reputation. Under the envelopment of the immovable circumference, both of them were unable to utilize their teleportation techniques. However, Zhang Yan had made ample preparations for the opening tribulation, and he had refined a few escape talismans with him. His speed was far faster than the other party, and after around 100 breaths of time, he had caught up to the other party. Chu Rui couldn't go any further. He stopped and quickly took out a divine ability. Just as he was about to use it, Zhang Yan let out a roar and slammed his palm forward. With a loud bang, it was as if the sky had collapsed within 1,000 miles. Before the divine ability could be used, it was shattered. The aftermath of the attack caused Chu Rui's body to explode into a cloud of clear air. The body of strength only needed to break through with force. There was no need to talk about any changes. No matter what divine art, come at me, I will destroy it with my own strength. In the dispersed clear air, another golden light flew into the sky. Zhang Yan sneered and said, "Let's see how many doppelgangers you still have." Chu Rui didn't have any method to fight against Zhang Yan. After a few dozen breaths, Zhang Yan caught up with him again and destroyed another doppelganger. Although his real body escaped, if this continued, he would die in an instant. On the Mo Chiu cliff, everyone looked solemn. Spiritual Master Bai Ji said anxiously, "Senior martial brother, Zhang Yan is too fierce. I'm afraid that Sect Master Chu can't hold on anymore. Why don't we use our treasures to save him?" Spiritual Master Kong looked down and said, "Which Taoist friend is willing to help?" Tan Dingxian stood up and bowed, "Let me help." He took out a jade hairpin from his sleeve and threw it towards the north. Shang Shooting also stood up and said, "Let me help fellow Taoist." He took out a long branch and tossed it towards the middle of the sky, and also threw it towards the northern sky. Xiao Lingyun thought for a while and stood up, "Sect Master Chu, we can't lose anything. Although the two sect masters are going to help, I'm afraid that Qinsong School will stop us. Since it's on the sea, I can use the King Jade Snake to wait in the water and ambush them halfway. If everything goes well, we can eat Zhang Yan." Floating Astronomy. Chapter 1178. In the floating celestial palace, the people in the hall saw two treasure lights flying out from the Mo Chiu cliff and immediately knew their intentions. Qi Hongchan said, "The Yuxiao school can't help but send help." Mengzhen said, "If Hall Master Du Zhen can kill Chu Rui, my fate will definitely grow. I can't let him ruin it." Sun Jinren sneered, "How can I let them succeed?" He took out a treasure pot from his sleeve and tossed it out. It turned into light and flew out of the floating celestial palace in the blink of an eye, flying towards the south. Perfected being Xiao pondered for a moment and said, "Let me deal with that branch." He shook his hand and a streak of fire followed him out of the hall. Before the two treasures that flew down from the Mo Chiu cliff could reach the north, they were intercepted by these two objects. Then they chased each other and got entangled with each other. It seemed like they would not be able to get rid of them for a while. The people from the Yuxiao school knew that no matter how they used their treasures to help, the Qinsong school would be able to stop them. If they really fought with treasures and Shaoqing's side interfered with their killing swords, their losses would be even greater. However, they could not turn a blind eye when their ally was in danger. Even if they knew it was useless, they had to put up a front. Putting aside the effort on the surface, the only method that could truly threaten Zhang Yan was the Jade King Snake from the Nanhua sect. Xiao Lingyun sat on the seat and held the heart concentration mantra to summon. At the foot of the Nanhua sect's first summon mountain, a huge snake with a body that was as bright as glass and crystal jade was sleeping. At this moment, its eyes suddenly widened and it woke up. The snake had a head but no tail. It was born with two heads, one in front and one at the back. The front head was male, and the back head was female. The male head had a neck and beautiful feathers. There was a single horn on the top of her head, scarlet red and short like a jade coral tree. The sharp teeth on the female head were exposed, and her face was covered with black lines that were modeled with different sizes, like the profound erosion runes. As it was activated by the mantra, its body only shook. He turned into a ball of dazzling cloud energy, silently passing through the mountains, moving along the earth veins, leaving the continent at an extremely fast speed. When he reached the eastern sea, he naturally turned north. After passing the Donghua continent, he saw a sea region. This was the path that Chu Rui had to pass through on his way south. Here he stopped moving. Instead, he quietly lay dormant here. Looking from afar, there was only a cloud of smoke in the sky and the sea. It was impossible to tell what it was. As for the aquatic creatures in the sea, they passed through his body as if they didn't notice anything. At the same time, on the other side, Immortal Sure watched as the two beams of light flew away one after another. He turned his head and asked, "Should we go and help sect leader Chu?" Wu Yunbi disagreed. "Zhang Yan's body is mysterious, we can't do anything to him at the moment. It's useless even if we go up." He pointed to the severed demon. "It's better to think of a way to destroy that demon. As long as we can free sect leader Chu's two killing swords, there will be room for negotiation." Spiritual Master Sure said, "We can give it a try. However, there's no need for all four of us to go up against one demon. How about this? Elder Yuan and I will go up and take care of it, while the two of you spiritual masters can cover us from the side." Wu Yunbi said, "All right, let's do that." At the same time, he transmitted his voice to Zhou Ruing. "Be careful. If you see that something is amiss, you can retreat in time." Zhou Ruing was startled. He also transmitted his voice. "Senior Martial Brother Wu, aren't you being too careful? Zhang Yan might be hard to deal with. But how could that monster be our match?" Wu Yunbi said, "I'm not worried about that demon. I'm just worried that after Zhang Yan defeats sect leader Chu, he will not be able to escape. Don't come back to cause trouble for us." Zhou Ruing was shocked. From the looks of it, it would be impossible to surround and kill Zhang Yan, and if he could kill Chu Rui, he would naturally be able to kill them as well. She said hesitantly, "Senior Brother Wu, then how about we retreat now?" Wu Yunbi shook his head and sighed, "That won't work. Yuan Yang sect is considered our ally. How can we abandon them just because they are at a disadvantage? We have to see the result." Zhou Ruing said with hatred, "If we had one more killing weapon, things would not be like this." Wu Yunbi said, "Maybe we could gain the upper hand for a while. However, Qinsong School is just nearby. They will be able to send help much faster than us. In this battle, we lost to sect leader Chu. But who would have thought that Zhang Yan is so fierce that he can't even defeat a cultivator who has cultivated his nascent embryo? What else can we do?" While the two of them were talking, Perfected Sure and Yuan had already arrived in front of the Intercept Demon. They immediately used their thunder techniques to attack. The Intercept Demon had been entangled with the two swords. Until now, it was covered in wounds. Although its injuries were not serious, it had lost a lot of vitality. At this moment, there were two more grotto heavens joining the battle. Moreover, all of them were attacking it. It immediately felt that it could not take it anymore. It shrunk its huge body to the size of several feet and floated away with the wind. Without the obstruction of this huge object, Deyuan and God Ming saw the opportunity. They let out sword whistles and were about to fly away. Who knew that at this moment, the Qinghong sword pill shook and suddenly transformed into thousands of light spots. Not only did it trap the two swords, but it also split into many sword lights and slashed towards where Sure and Yuan were. At this moment, Chu Rui was already far away. Without the restraint of the magnetic gold hourglass, he could naturally split the sword lights at will. However, the four of them were all concerned about their own lives. Although they did not have any killing treasures in hand, they still took defensive items with them. Perfected Sure was not flustered. He blocked with his sleeve and 1,000 leaf petals flew out. They danced in the air and received all the sword lights that came over. If Zhang Yan was here, he might be a little afraid. Now that there was no one controlling the real sword, it did not have many changes. It was naturally not difficult to deal with. He said, "Elder Yuan, I will receive this sword light. I will leave the demon to you." Yuan Yiweng agreed. He took out a beast-subduing pen and waved it outwards. Immediately, many eagles of all shapes and sizes flew out. There were at least 10,000 of them. Perhaps the Yuanian cultivators could not deal with these demon birds, but to the grotto heavens, they could all be wiped out with a wave of their dharma. They were practically useless in battle. It wasn't that this was all he could do. Rather, he had used a trick, purposefully releasing the demonic birds and insects, in order to slightly attract the attention of the Dark North swords. If he succeeded, he would be able to help those two killing swords escape from their entanglement at an extremely small cost. Of course, if this did not work, he still had a backup plan. However, the Dark North sword did not pay any attention to him. Taking advantage of the two swords being held back by the clear swan sword light, he turned into a beam of profound light and shot south. At the same time, Chu Rui's last clone had also been killed by Zhang Yan. He once again turned into a beam of golden light and fled. If he was caught again, there would be no way out other than to fight with his life on the line. At this time, he had already retreated to the seas outside the Donghua continent. He saw a mass of fog in front of him, which seemed rather strange. He had a sudden thought. This place was extremely close to the main gate of the Taihao school. He guessed that this was something Yu Xiao had set up to receive him. His spirits immediately rose. This loss was because he had underestimated his opponent. As long as he went back and made some preparations, the next time he faced him, he would not be in such a sorry state. He thought to himself, Zhang Yan was not injured at all under the joint attack of those four fellow Taoists. With a wave of his hand, he could stir the clouds in the sky. It is very likely that he has cultivated that method of strength. And to be able to gain the upper hand against me, he must have cultivated above the 5th level of strength conversion. Such a strong body is comparable to a sky demon. As for how Zhang Yan had cultivated it, he did not understand and did not think too much about it. At this time, he was not far from the fog. This fog did not dissipate under the impact of his aura. He was even more certain of his guess, so he did not hesitate to expend his spiritual power. His Yuan core moved, and with a flash of light, he burrowed in and quickly disappeared without a trace. Zhang Yan saw this scene from behind. How could he not know that there was something strange about this fog? He scanned with his Dharma eye, but he could not see through it. With a thought, he smiled coldly. The flying light did not change its direction and crashed into it. Just at this moment, the mist suddenly surged and suddenly turned from illusory to solid. It turned into the head of a 10,000 feet long snake. His body was in the mouth of the blood-red snake. The upper and lower jaws closed and he was swallowed. Xiao Lingyun was overjoyed and stood up. He clapped his hands and said, "It's done." This jade glaze king snake could only fight against a person from the heavenly abode. But it had one ability. This snake had a head but no stomach. No matter what it swallowed, it could move it to another world. Even if someone had strong spiritual power and could break out of the world, they would not be able to return to the real world. They would only be trapped in the void. Even if it was a person who had cultivated an Yuan core, he would still die if he was swallowed into the snake's stomach. If Zhang Yan left just now, there was nothing he could do. But at least he saved Chu Rui. Once he entered the fog, his fate was sealed. Spiritual Master Bai Bai said, "Sect Master Xiao, Sect Master Chu hasn't come out yet. Wouldn't he be swallowed by the king's snake?" Xiao Lingyun laughed and said, "Don't worry, my friend. This king snake is born with 2 heads. It's a friend and not an enemy. After swallowing the male head, it can escape from the female head. If it's an enemy and not a friend, it can trap it in another world. Even if it doesn't die, it won't be seen again." As expected, the female head of the snake raised and spat out a rainbow. It was Chu Rui. Shang Shooting took a look and smiled. "Sect Master Xiao, you have done a great service." Zhenren Kongjing stroked his beard and said, "That's right. Zhang Yan is the Qinsong School's Hall Master Duzhen. Once this person is eliminated, the fate of Qinsong will be greatly affected. Sect Master Xiao, you have done a great service." Hearing what he said, many people in the hall praised him. Even though Xiao Lingyun looked reserved, he was slightly proud in his heart. But at this moment, the king's snake suddenly rolled and screamed loudly. Its voice was extremely miserable, and then 2 profound qi hands broke out from the snake's abdomen. After grabbing one side of the snake, they suddenly tore it apart, and a crack appeared on it in an instant. Zhang Yan's sleeves fluttered and he stepped out on a rainbow. Under the Xian Qi behind him, the king snake's body was broken into pieces. When Chu Rui saw it, his expression changed. He knew that the snake couldn't trap Zhang Yan. At this moment, he didn't choose to escape. Instead, he became serious and released his Dharma form as his nascent embryo trembled. Boundless golden sword rays opened up in the sky and shot out tens of thousands of miles. It was grand and magnificent, covering the light of the sun and the moon. He shouted fiercely and rushed down with thousands of miles of cloud light. He used all the mana in his nascent embryo to suppress Zhang Yan in one fell swoop while he was still in the snake's abdomen just now. Zhang Yan looked up and his eyes flashed. He waved his hand and a ray of light flew into his hand. He pressed his hand on the back of the sword and said, "Master Darknorth, do you remember the time I joined forces with you to slash?" Darknorth's sword laughed and said, "How can I not remember? Come, slash open this world with me." Zhang Yan laughed heartily as well, and then his expression turned solemn as he let out a clear howl and took a step forward. Instantly, his body fused with his sword, and he transformed into a brilliant ray of sword light that shot into the sky. Everywhere the ray of light passed, the golden light that covered the sky was torn apart by a single strike of his sword. Chapter 1179. When Zhang Yan slashed with his sword, it was as if the sky was really torn apart. The chi broke through the clouds and gold fell everywhere. The spiritual vigor shook, causing the sea waves to roar, and the roars were like 10,000 thunders. The chi gathered by a third-stage realm cultivator's dharma physique was extremely vast. Once it was broken, it caused countless golden lights to fall down like meteors. The entire eastern sea was splashed with waves without any signs of stopping. It looked like it was boiling. He followed the sword light and rushed for thousands of miles before he stabilized his chi dynamic and stood in the void. He turned his head and saw a beautiful galaxy in the sky falling into the sea. It looked very beautiful. In the next thousands of years, this place would be flourishing with aquatic creatures, and the island would be lush with vegetation. At this moment, among the thousands of lights, there was a condensed light flying out. It was the size of a rice grain and not very eye-catching, but he could sense that it was where the spiritual vigor was. With a glance, he knew what it was. After a cultivator in the Grotto Heaven cave cultivated the embryo, his chi dynamic was almost endless. Even if the Dharma body was broken, as long as a wisp of chi dynamic escaped back to the sect to cultivate, it could be cultivated again. If it was any other time, he would have let him take it off. However, this was a battle of life and death. He couldn't hold back, especially since the Xuanjiyang wall in the Yuanyang sect could increase spiritual vigor. Who knew if he would be able to come out again after a long time? Therefore, he would not allow it to have a chance to revive. He raised his hand indifferently and pointed with his fingers. A thunder shock caught up and instantly shattered it. At this moment, the head of Yuanyang sect, Chu Rui, had really and truly died in his hands. Even if there might be a part of his soul left in the sect, he could only turn around and reincarnate. He could no longer come out and cause trouble for the Qinsong school. However, since he had killed a sect leader, he had naturally made enemies with the cultivators of that sect. As long as he survived this tribulation of humans, he would not be able to escape. In this time, as long as he did not die, he believed that there would be a chance to meet him. At this moment, he suddenly heard an unusual movement in the sea. He looked over and saw that the two heads of the Jade Glaze King Snake were twisting, as if they were going to connect to another place. He knew that it was still alive. He smiled indifferently and took out the North Sea sword in his hand. A sword light descended and instantly chopped the two snake heads into mush, completely ending their lives. This strange snake that the Southern Flower sect had reared for thousands of years was also unlucky. Zhang Yan knew that after the tribulation, he would definitely fight with the Southern Flower sect, Taihao sect, and the other sects, so he was prepared for these sects' divine arts and means in advance. He had investigated quite a lot of information about the Southern Flower sect, and most of it came from Taozhenren. Moreover, because he had met Taoist Crane in the past, he had long since learned that the Jade Glaze King Snake had the ability to move a world. This time, he was able to avoid it. What he relied on was a divine art he had obtained after reaching rank 5 in Strength Path. It was called One with the World. After this divine ability was executed, it was equivalent to fusing into one with the heavens and the earth in this world, and all external forces couldn't come into contact with it. So, he seemed to have fallen into the snake's mouth on the surface, but he wasn't actually swallowed, so he naturally wouldn't be transported to another world. However, this karmic cause suddenly appeared and disappeared. If he wasn't careful when using it, he would only end up getting tired. If it was someone else, they might not dare to use it like this. The Jade Glaze King snake was covered in jade glass scales, and even killing swords might not be able to cut through it. If it tangled with him, Chu Rui would be able to escape smoothly. In order to finish it off in the shortest time possible, Zhang Yan took a risk and escaped into the snake's belly. That was why he took the risk and escaped into the snake's belly to break it open. At this moment, on the Mochiu cliff, the hall was dead silent. No one could believe that a third-layer cultivator who had cultivated his origin embryo would fall into the hands of Zhang Yan. It should be known that a person who had cultivated his origin embryo, just his clone, was comparable to an ordinary grotto heaven, and he alone could fight against a whole sect. Even though Chu Rui was at a disadvantage just now, no one had thought that he would be defeated and killed. They couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. If he could kill this Yuan Yang sect master, then he could kill anyone here. Tan Dingxian said bitterly, "If I remember correctly, this person has cultivated for less than 1,000 years. Shang Shooting thought for a while, then shook his head and sighed, "We can't judge a genius with common sense. With this person, Qinsong School's luck has increased by 30% for no reason." Zhenren Kongjing said calmly, "It's just a temporary loss. The overall situation is still in my hands. If Qinsong School was this powerful, they wouldn't have allowed Zhang Yan to come out and solve the problem alone." He slightly leaned to the side and said to Wu Yunqing, who was sitting down, "Zheng Xing Peak Master, please write a letter to Yuan Yang sect to comfort them. Also, tell them that even if Sect Master Chu is not here, our previous promise will not change." Wu Yunqing bowed and said, "Hall Master Kongjing, thank you for your consideration. I will send a letter to you right now." At this moment, Xiao Lingyun's expression was uglier than anyone else's. Seeing that the spirit snake guarding the mountain of his sect was slaughtered, he was shocked and angry. This snake was left by the founder of the sect. Now that it was killed by him, he felt ashamed to face his master. He suddenly stood up and solemnly bowed to Tan Dingxian, saying, "Sect Master Tan, if this person is not eliminated, we will not be able to rest in peace. Please send a mystic technique to kill this person." As he spoke, he pointed in the direction of Zhang Yan, his voice full of resentment. Sect Master Tan could not help but sigh. This was the second time that Xiao Lingyun had asked him to use this technique. However, this mystic technique was related to the overall situation and was not something that he could decide alone. He could only say, "If fellow Taoist Yu Xiao thinks it's possible, I will not refuse." Xiao Lingyun cast his gaze to the seat, bowed and said, "Fellow Taoist Kongjing, if I don't take this opportunity to kill this person, I will suffer even more losses." Zhenren Kongjing, on the other hand, was silent. If the mystic technique was used, there would be no deterrence and they would enter the chaotic battle of the various sects in advance. At this moment, he suddenly felt the qi dynamic on his body sink and his heart sink. He could not help but be slightly surprised. Looking at this situation, it was not as simple as his side's fate energy being affected, it was even showing signs of falling. He immediately thought that this was not only because Chu Rui was killed, but also because the people's hearts were wavering. Everyone present could also sense this change. Enlightened Master Bai pondered for a moment, stood up and bowed, saying, "Senior brother, the 4 enlightened masters who went with Sect Master Chu are still outside. If Zhang Yan goes back to kill them, it will not be easy to bring them back. I hope senior brother will think twice." Shang Shooting also said, "Fellow Taoist Kongjing, Sect Master Chu is already dead. If we don't deal with this person in a thunderous manner, I'm afraid the people's hearts will not be at ease." Zhenren Kongjing nodded. He had also made up his mind that this could not go on. Even if the mystic technique might fail, he could at least bring the 4 people back and avoid further damage. He turned his head and said, "Sect Master Tan, please make your move." Tan Dingxian bowed and said, "Everyone, please wait a moment." He turned around and bowed a few times to the sky. He then took out a long incense from his sleeve and blew it with a breath of clear air. The incense burned by itself and turned into a green smoke that floated into the sky. Not long after, the huge star stone that was originally hanging outside the heavens sensed something and suddenly trembled. Then, it suddenly fell, bringing with it a scarlet flame and rumbled towards the 9 continents. In an instant, it broke through several layers of strong clouds in the atmosphere. Finally, there was a loud noise that sounded like the sky was being split open. The stone suddenly cracked and turned into countless faintly discernible colorless flames that were like mist and chi that scattered outwards. At this moment, everyone who saw the flames felt an inexplicable palpitation in their hearts. Tan Dingxian said, "This flame is called the Heart Origin Tribulation Fire. It was formed from the blood of several ancestors in the West Continent. It was refined in the heart furnace for 1,000 years. No matter where you come from, if your cultivation base has not reached the stage of breaking through the boundary, you will immediately turn into a pile of flying ashes if you come into contact with this flame." Wu Fenggu asked, "Sect Master Tan, with my composure, why do I feel a sense of fear when I look at it?" Tan Dingxian said, "There's a reason for this. This flame exists in between form and form. It is connected to a person's divine will. Even if you look at it for a long time, it can enter a person's heart and burn their essence, primordial spirit, and spirit. Once it has identified the person's chi, it will be useless no matter if you hide in a small world or a mountain gate. If Zhang Yan dares to destroy the continent at this moment, he will be burned to death by this flame the moment he thinks about it." Everyone was shocked when they heard this. They dared not look at it anymore and did not dare to have any rash thoughts. When Tan Dingxian saw everyone's expression, he quickly said, "Don't be afraid, everyone. I'm a person who holds the law. This flame will only go after the enemy. It will definitely not hurt anyone." He turned his head to look at the scattered fireballs that were falling from the sky. He sighed and said, "This method is more than enough to attack dozens of people, but it's a bit of a waste to use it against one person." Just as he finished speaking, he saw that the fireballs that were still in midair actually stopped in unison. Then, as if they were being guided, they all flew in the same direction. The fireballs also became larger and larger, and it seemed like they were about to converge into one. Jinren Kongjing's body trembled. He stood up and said, "It's the Venerable One." Right at this moment, a mighty Milky Way rushed out from the dark azure sect's mountain gate, sweeping over. With just a wave, it instantly engulfed most of the fire. Almost at the same time, a sword light flew out from the Shaoqing mountain gate and landed on the flame. It actually cut off the remaining 90% in one go. However, some of it still fell. Looking at its direction, it was coming for Zhang Yan. When Zhenren Kongjing saw this, he said coldly, "Shaoqing, Qinzhen. It's clear this time." The moment the flame appeared, Zhang Yan sensed great danger. How could he not guess that the other party used mystic techniques? He looked at the sky and quickly determined that even though the flame was cut off again and again, its power was still far beyond what a person could handle. The talisman that sect leader Qin gave him previously might not be able to block it. At this point, he could only rely on himself to save himself. Fortunately, the flame did not fly very fast, so there was still a chance. His thoughts raced, and he immediately came up with an idea. He summoned the Qinghong sword pill from afar and combined with him. They immediately turned into a sword rainbow and fled to the west. Xiao Lingyun frowned and asked, "This person is not going north, but to the west. Is he asking for Shaoqing's help?" Tan Dingxian said coldly, "That's for the best. This flame will not extinguish until it catches up to this person. Even if someone reaches out to help, even if they are thousands of miles away, they will still be affected and fall into the tribulation fire. I'm not afraid of Shaoqing's help, but I'm afraid that he won't." At this moment, Zhang Yan crossed the continent and quickly left the East Flower continent, heading straight for the West Sea. Then he leaped and fell into the sea. As soon as he entered the sea, the flame followed him and entered the sea. Those who knew would be able to recognize that the direction he was heading to was the sea eye that suppressed the sun-swallowing green locust. Chapter 1180. After Zhang Yan dove into the ocean, he used the dragon soul essence to split the waves and dive down. However, the tribulation flames seemed to be special. At the start, it was slow, but as time went on, it became faster and faster, slowly catching up. Thus, he had no choice but to use his movement technique. His body was like a streak of light, and in just a few hours, he arrived at the eye of the ocean. What he saw was the voodoo mysterious water that filled up the area. His body shook and he used the water movement technique. In an instant, he passed through the water and entered where the mountain and mountain seal was. After he stabilized his body, he shook his sleeves and a cloud of smoke passed. 100 feet tall 6-story pavilion appeared and he tossed the demon treasury out. His strength path techniques were learned from this demon treasury. After he formed his grotto heaven, he used many methods to attack this item, but he couldn't damage it at all. He guessed that this item came from beyond the sky. If it could even fly through the void, then it might be able to block the tribulation flame. However, he didn't know what the origin of this item was and he didn't want to expose it in front of others. This place was blocked by the voodoo mysterious water. This water was used to suppress the eye of the ocean and also to cover the eyes and ears of people who wanted to. Even an ascended Jinren wouldn't be able to discern what was going on within. If he took out the demon treasury here, he wouldn't be afraid of people seeing it. He called out in his heart and the 2 stone doors opened. He looked back and saw the tribulation fire pass through the voodoo mysterious water without a sound. It was chasing after him, but as he looked over, the fire seemed to want to enter his heart. He laughed coldly and jumped into the demon treasury. The door behind him slammed shut. The tribulation flame fell down, but it followed. This flame was between form and formless. Logically speaking, even the mountain gate formation wouldn't be able to block it. However, when it smashed into the demon treasury, it was actually blocked. It tried to charge forward a few times, but it couldn't get over. In the end, it could only circle around the building. Zhang Yan saw that the flame couldn't enter and calmed down. He came to the 5th floor and sat down. Although he was able to avoid the attack of the tribulation flame, he temporarily couldn't go out. He didn't know how long this fire could last, but it would be difficult for him to do anything before the fire was extinguished. However, just now, after the battle, his spiritual power had been consumed quite a lot. It was a good opportunity for him to recover a little. So, he took out a medicinal pill from his sleeve and swallowed it. Then he meditated and adjusted his breathing. Xiao Lingyun watched him dive into the sea. He didn't come out for a long time, but he didn't know what was happening below, so he asked, "Sect Master Tan, in your opinion, can this person escape the fire?" Tan Dingxian hesitated for a moment before she said, "Unless Zhang Yan breaks through the void and escapes right now, he won't be able to escape the fire. Even if you come down, you won't be able to show your face. You're no longer a threat to me." Palace Master Bai Bai interrupted, "What if the 2 sect masters lend a helping hand?" Tan Dingxian thought for a while. He replied, "This fire is the heart fire. Whoever is helping out will have to bear the brunt of it. If the sect leaders of the 2 sects could resolve it together, they would have done so long ago. Right now, they are both resolving the fire calamity. If they were to make a move again, I'm afraid these 2 will also suffer from the burning disaster." Xiao Lingyun unconsciously nodded and praised, "The methods of the ancestors are indeed impressive." Tan Dingxian said, "We only need to wait for Zhang Yan to die. My fate will be able to overshadow the other side." Jinren Kongjing shook his head and said, "We can't pin our hopes on this. Although Zhang Yan is gone, Qinsong School's strength still exists. Without the threat of the fire calamity in the sky, this generation has less scruples. In order to save the situation, it is very likely that they will go out to fight. I'm afraid the battle will be even more intense later. Everyone, please be careful." Everyone's expression was slightly stern. They thought that what Jinren Kongjing said was very reasonable. Just now, with Chu Rui's death, the fate of both sides had become almost equal. The advantage that they had accumulated previously was gone. If Zhang Yan died, Qinsong School would definitely lose a few more points. In order to break the situation, it was very likely that they would take the initiative to attack. However, if it was not dead, It was very likely that it would not move. Shang Shooting said solemnly, "What Qinsong school will do next will depend on Zhang Yan's life." Tan Dingxian said with certainty, "This person will definitely die." Xiao Lingyun glanced at the divine beast egg that had fallen into the sea and snorted, "We'll know in a day or two." At this moment, 30,000 feet underground, Liang Xuanyi sat above the river Styx and looked towards the horizon. In the past, he could see a stone hanging in the sky, but now, there was no trace of it. He said slowly, "The star stone has cracked, and the blade hanging above has disappeared. It's time for us to make a move." Although he had agreed with Lord Lingya to deal with Qinsong and Shaoqing sects together, it did not mean that they would not be on guard against each other. He also knew that the profound technique on the star stone was especially powerful. If Yu Xiao also had the intention to eliminate the 6 sects, he would be able to use it during the intense battle, and all his enemies would be wiped out in one fell swoop. But now, there was no need to worry about this anymore. His mind sank, and he disappeared like smoke. When he appeared again, he was already inside a vast cave abode that had no end. There was a stone tablet the size of a mountain standing here, and there were 5 people sitting outside the tablet. They were the leaders of the other 5 sects of the demonic sect. Seeing his arrival, they hurriedly stood up and cupped their fists together, saying, "Greetings, sect leader Liang." Liang Xuanyi nodded slightly and looked at the Origin Mirage sect leader Xue Dingyuan, asking, "Sect leader Xue, how's the setup?" Xue Dingyuan bowed and said, "Everything is ready. We only need sect leader Liang to activate the profound technique. Originally, we were going to carry out this plan, but if it drags on for too long, we need to extract spiritual vigor from the various spiritual points to make up for it. But now that the last spiritual point has appeared, we can borrow it. This is really the help of the heavens." Liang Xuanyi said in a deep voice, "If we don't do it, even if we get help from the heavens, it will be useless. Our spirit gate has been suppressed by the Taoists for nearly 10,000 years. Now that the Taoists are in internal chaos, we can borrow the great calamity to rise up and attack the other generation to change our fate." Hearing that, the leaders of the various sects naturally agreed in unison. Xue Dingyuan cupped his fists and said, "May I know where we're going to attack?" Liang Xuanyi said, "Qinsong school is restrained by Yu Xiao, so there's no need to pay attention to it. Shaoqing sect is in a friendly alliance with them, so I should be the one to cut it off." Xue Dingyuan already had a plan in mind, so he bowed and stood in front of the tablet. This was his Origin Mirage sect's treasure, the great spiritual tablet of mental imagery. With this tablet as the foundation, it could draw out a profound technique called false spirit reflecting reality. Once this technique was activated, the qi of the Origin Mirage qi would immediately cover the heavens and earth, and it could reflect the many people that appeared in the great spiritual tablet into the world. Moreover, it could be driven by one side to attack and annihilate the enemy. As long as the spiritual opportunity was not exhausted, this technique could be maintained. There was a saying that went, "The falling flowers in the well illuminate the ruined face. The shaking shadow does not move the entire realm. The river flew and chased after the moon. Changing the scenery only depended on one's heart." The combined forces of the 6 demonic sects had already greatly suppressed Shaoqing sect on the surface, but if they wanted to destroy this sect, they would definitely have to pay a huge price. Even if they won, it would be difficult for them to win against the Xian sect in the future. However, with this technique, it was different. The cultivators of the 6 sects did not have to personally go into battle. As long as they had enough spiritual opportunity, they could continuously command the mental illusions to attack. Liang Xuanyi shook his sleeves. A thick yellow smoke poured into the tablet, and as he cast the technique, the entire tablet started to buzz and tremble. Seeing that, the 4 sect leaders of the Blood Spirit sect, 9 Spirits sect, Hunching sect, and Bone Shadow sect also cast a technique into it at the same time. The originally dark surface of the great spiritual tablet suddenly became clear and bright, and one could vaguely see many figures standing within it. Their original faces were a little blurry. However, as time passed, they gradually became clearer. Xue Dingyuan saw that he had achieved his goal. He chanted the spell in his heart and used his spiritual power to guide it. In an instant, there was a loud sound as if the world was shaking. Surging mirage energy erupted from the great spiritual steel. Then a dozen or so figures rode on the clouds and flew in the direction of the Shaoqing sect. The sect leader of the Jiuling sect, Fei Yu, observed for a moment before saying, "These illusory figures are able to cast mystic arts, yet they don't have any magical treasures on them. I wonder how long they can hold out against the Shaoqing sect." Xue Dingyuan said with a smile, "Although we don't know the exact number of Shaoqing sect's heavenly abode cultivators, there are many of them. However, if it doesn't exceed 9, then even if he can kill it, he will definitely lose his essence qi and magic power. We can still take a peek at his divine abilities and methods. The next time we really fight him, we can be on guard." The Blood Soul sect's sect master, Fang Shentong, said coldly, "After exterminating Shaoqing, Qinsong School will not be able to do anything alone." Everyone nodded in agreement. As for whether attacking Shaoqing would damage the continent, they did not consider it. Naturally, Venerable Lingya would protect them. As expected, not long after those illusory figures flew out, a spiritual light shot out from the Scarlet Jade Cliff. In an instant, the entire East Flower continent was illuminated within it. At this moment, the great spiritual steel shook again, and another dozen or so people flew out from it. At this moment, the expressions of those who flew out were no different from real people. The sect leaders could recognize people they were familiar with, and there were even cultivators from their own sections. Fei Yu said, "Are there only cultivators from my spirit sect here?" Xue Dingyuan replied, "Of course not. I have also summoned many powerful figures from the mystic sect. For example, that Qinsong School's Yan Changxing is also among them. Even if he doesn't have any magical treasures on him, his battle prowess is not to be underestimated." Fei Yu sighed and said, "It's a pity that this qi has evolved into people below the nascent embryo stage. Otherwise, it would bring even more trouble to the Shaoqing sect." Xue Dingyuan smiled deeply and said, "That might not be the case." With a rumble, the great spiritual steel shook again. Everyone turned their heads to look. This time, there were many people who came out, unlike the previous 2 times. There was actually only one person, and he did not fly away immediately. Instead, he slowly walked out from inside. He had a dignified appearance and wore a black robe. Profound qi revolved around his body. Just by standing there, he had a shocking might. Zhang Yan? Other than Liang Xuanyi, the other sect leaders were shocked when they saw him. They all stood up and could not help but want to attack. Xue Dingyuan smiled and said, "Everyone, don't be alarmed. This is an illusory figure formed from the spirit steel. I will use such a person to attack Shaoqing. Let's see how they deal with it." Everyone looked at each other and nodded subconsciously. Just now, the scene of Zhang Yan fighting and killing Chu Rui was naturally seen by them. Even Yan Changxing had lost his life in the hands of this person. He could be said to be extremely ferocious. Although he had not refined the nascent embryo and was only a mental image incarnation, he should be able to bring Shaoqing quite a bit of trouble. Xue Dingyuan took out a hand seal and wanted to command it. However, after he gave the order, the illusory figure of Zhang Yan stood there without moving. He could not help but be shocked. The illusory figure looked at everyone coldly. With a leap, it soared into the sky and leaped to the west. Chapter 1181. The sect masters of the Devil sect were suspicious when they saw Zhang Yan's illusion flying away. Fei Yu asked, "Sect Master Xue, did something happen?" Xue Dingyuan thought for a while, then bowed to Liang Xuanyi and asked, "Sect Master Liang, this place? Although the mystic technique was entrusted to the Mystic Clam sect's treasure, the person who executed it was Liang Xuanyi. Even if there were changes in it, it was difficult for him to know what was going on." Liang Xuanyi remained silent at first. He seemed to have probed for a while before saying, "I already know the whole story. This person should have a mysterious secret technique, which is why his illusion is different from ours. If we use it to attack, we will need to use more essence qi and mana. This is not worth it, so there's no need to restrain it anymore. Furthermore, it is formed by the spirit tablet, so it won't take the initiative to become my enemy if we don't provoke it. Sect masters, don't worry. Fei Yu frowned and said, if we can't use it, won't we waste our spiritual opportunity for nothing? Liang Xuanyi said plainly, I know about this, but the Shaoqing sect doesn't. Furthermore, it is restrained by the spirit tablet and is still in my formation. How can the person on the other side really ignore it? If we use it well, it can still help me. Qinghong Palace, Sun Piercer Great Mountain Dun. The Shaoqing sect master, Yu Xianxiao, stood in the hall. Below him were the 8 enlightened masters. According to seniority, the people standing at the top were Ying Chuanqiu, Xuan, Yu Shirong, Feng Xianzhao, and Chao Xiao. Below them were Ran Xiushu, Qing Chunzi, and Sun Huaying, the 3 juniors who had achieved the grotto heaven within 1,000 years. The 3 of them learned different sword techniques. Each of the 3 lineages had a branch, so they stood in different positions. The Devil sect did not hide anything, so the Shaoqing sect naturally noticed it immediately. However, no one in the hall had any change in expression. They all looked indifferent. Xuan smiled and said, the Devil sect has some guts to attack us like this? This time, we can kill to our heart's content. Ying Chuanqiu took a few glances. With his mana, he could naturally tell that these people were formed by spiritual opportunity and essence qi. He said, the ones coming are illusions. To be able to come out so much, this disciple guessed that it was because of the profound technique, probably because he wanted to use it to exhaust my essence qi and mana. Xuan said indifferently, it doesn't matter if it's an illusion or a real body. We will kill whoever comes. After a pause, he said to Reverend Lu, what does Reverend Lu think? Yu Shirong looked up and said seriously, sure. Ying Chuanqiu shook his head. At this moment, a whistling sound suddenly came from outside the hall. Everyone looked towards the source of the sound and saw a spiritual light penetrating into the hall. Ying Chuanqiu raised his hand. He flipped it open and took a look. Then he bowed to the hall and said, Shizuan, sect leader Qin has sent a letter asking if the Devil sect needs Qinsong School's help when they attack. Yu Xianxiao thought for a moment and said, it's just that the 6 sects of the demonic Tao are more than enough to deal with them. Send a letter back saying that I thank sect master Qin for his good intentions. We only need to trouble him to restrain Lingya. Ying Chuanqiu agreed. Yu Xianxiao said, if it's only the Shaoqing sect in this battle, I don't mind fighting with these illusions. However, this time, we're not fighting for victory. We still need to consider the safety of our alliance, so we can't act rashly. Reverends, please bear this in mind. The Shaoqing sect members bowed and agreed. Yu Xianxiao looked up and said indifferently, if they have profound techniques, do you think I don't? He waved his hand, and a ray of light that was as bright as a silver star flew out and reached the top of the mountain. Very quickly, it turned into millions of spots of light and merged with the surrounding heaven and earth. This technique was called Absolute Joy of Heaven's Heart. After it was used, every ray of sword light could turn into a black hole in the void. If a cultivator came over and jumped around, as long as he bumped into the place where the sword light was, he would trigger the killing intent and be killed by the sword. This was not an illusion, but a cultivator from the Devil sect's grotto heaven. Under such a profound technique, he would also be unable to resist. This was because the black hole would change once every 10 breaths. Even if one didn't move or turn, as long as they were within the range of this technique, they wouldn't be able to stand still. The only way to avoid it was to retreat far away. At this moment, the dozen or so illusions that came out from the Devil sect had already arrived in front of the Shaoqing sect. As soon as they arrived, a few of them spread out their dharma and surrounded the sun-piercing mountain. For a moment, there was no longer any light in the sky. There were only hazy clouds, bloody fog, and chilly winds that howled and raged, covering the entire world. It looked like it would be able to drown the Shaoqing sect's mountain in one fell swoop. However, such a scene could only be seen in the Donghua continent. Outside the shroud of Yuanying Qi, the sky was clear and bright, and there was no movement at all. It was as if it had turned into 2 different worlds. Among the many illusions, a yellow-robed Taoist appeared. If anyone recognized him, they would recognize that he was an elder of the Nether Spring sect who had passed away a long time ago. He sneered and said, "Perfected ones, if Shaoqing cowers and no one comes out to fight me, I'll attack his mountain. Let's see if he agrees or not." However, not long after he said that, his expression suddenly changed, as if he had encountered something terrifying. In the next moment, he disappeared without a sound, as if he had never appeared in this world. This was because he had accidentally touched a black hole in the void, causing all his spiritual vigor and essence to be instantly taken away. These illusions received the methods of the various sect leaders and were not much different from real people. They also had their own intelligence. Seeing such a scene, they immediately knew that they had fallen into Shaoqing's trap. The few people from before immediately wanted to retract their dharma, but it was already too late. One by one, they followed in the footsteps of that person. Liang Xuanyi looked at this scene coldly. He had already expected this. In his previous speculations, if Shaoqing sect used Xian techniques to stop them, then it would be impossible for all the illusions to reach Shaoqing sect's mountain. It was already not bad for 10 to 20% of them to stay. However, he had the last spirit cave as his backing. As long as the spiritual vigor was continuous, he could continuously send out illusions. However, he did not believe that Shaoqing's Xian techniques could continue to resist him like this. Sooner or later, there would be a moment of exhaustion. At that time, he would either use another Xian technique to resolve the crisis, or he could only choose to fight. Otherwise, the mountain would definitely be surrounded by them. At this moment, the illusions in the sky disappeared one after another. Very soon, there was only one person left. His figure was constantly changing, but he was actually not killed by the Xian techniques. Instead, he was continuously approaching Shaoqing sect's main gate. Xuan took a look and instantly became interested. He said, "It's Qinsong School's Zhenren Yan. I didn't expect the devil sect to also have such a person." Ying Chuanxiu said in a deep voice, "Zhenren Yan has long cultivated one of the 5 techniques and 3 scriptures of Qinsong School, the Yuanshan spiritual cave scripture, to a high level. If this illusions can copy all of his methods and abilities, then they might be able to detect some changes in the qi dynamic in advance. No wonder they can survive for so long." Elder Shui turned around and said, "Sect leader? Can I meet him for a while?" Yu Xianshao thought for a while. If it was only one person fighting, it would not be a problem. He could also use this to test if the devil sect had any hidden trump cards. He nodded and only reminded, "Elder Shui, don't be greedy for battle." Elder Shui laughed and said that he understood. Then, he turned into a light and flew away. Before his voice faded away, he had actually arrived before Yan Changxing's illusions, and he slashed down with his sword. The extreme sword was swift like a bolt of lightning. Logically speaking, if Elder Shui didn't possess a suitable magic artifact in his possession, then there would surely be no chance for him to survive this strike. However, the phantom seemed to have known of this change in advance, and with a wave of its hand, it executed the space divide technique, causing the tip of Elder Shui's sword to instantly descend into empty air. Before he could raise his sword again, the illusions pointed at him and instantly cut off all his senses of the qi dynamic. His opponent was clearly still within his field of vision, but he just had a feeling that his opponent was illusory and indeterminate. Not only was Elder Shui not shocked, he became even more interested and thought to himself, "Interesting. Even if Zhenren Yan is really here, I'm afraid he can only deal with it like this when my sword approaches him. Unfortunately, you don't have any magic tools in your possession. Even if I don't use my divine abilities, how many strikes can you take from me?" With a turn of his body, a ray of sword light had already leaped out. However, before the sword shadow in front of him disappeared, a ray of sword light had already shot out from the back of Yan Changxing's illusions and instantly pierced through his body. However, the illusions split up and actually took the initiative to disperse his spiritual vigor before the sword light reached his body. He leaped in all directions and actually managed to avoid another strike. Moreover, because his spiritual vigor had been cut off, Elder Shui was unable to determine where the real body was. It was obvious that he had already predicted the subsequent changes before this move, and thus made such a response. However, Elder Shui did not chase after him. Instead, he retracted his sword and instantly revealed a look of pity. He did not chase after him anymore. Although his opponent had dodged his sword strike, his actions would not be able to avoid the void Xian hole that existed everywhere around him. As expected, the countless spiritual vigor that dispersed did not go far, as if it had collided with some invisible force and was forcibly erased from the sky, never to gather again. Elder Shui shook his head. In actual fact, just now, he had lost a move. If there was no Xian Shu above his head, perhaps he could have fought to his heart's content. He flicked his sleeves, and just as he was about to escape back to the mountain gate, he glanced around and stopped. There were more than 10 rays of light coming over from afar. However, after taking a closer look, his eyebrows raised, and he said in surprise, "Isn't that spiritual master Zhang of Qinsong School? I didn't expect his illusions to be among them. Should I go up and have a fight with him?" Under the West Sea Eye, after Zhang Yan meditated for a few hours, his mana had already recovered. Although he was sitting in the demonic treasury, his cultivation had already broken through to the 7th gate. With a move of his spirit, he could see the mountains and rivers of the 9 continents. Although this move consumed a little of his mana, he did not need to fight with anyone now, so there was no need to deliberately recuperate. After a brief investigation, he saw more than 10 rays of light flying towards the direction of the Shaoqing sect's mountain gate. After looking for a moment, he could not help but raise his eyebrows and realized that his own family was actually among them. So it's just an illusion. He pondered for a moment, looked at the tribulation fire that lingered outside, and had an idea in his heart. He thought to himself, I can give it a try. Even if it doesn't work, I won't lose anything. He pointed at the center of his eyebrows, and with a flash of spiritual light, he took out the demon-subduing slip. Then he threw it out, and it turned into a brilliant rainbow light, passing through the demonic treasury without any obstruction, all the way to the direction of the Yudun. Chapter 1182. The demon-subduing talisman had a bit of Zhang Yan's soul attached to it, so he could control it as he wished. After exiting the eye of the ocean, it turned into a thin wisp of smoke, flying towards the Shaoqing sect mountain gate. Very quickly, it entered the area covered by the essence soul energy. When he entered, the sky darkened, the scenery around was blurry. The clouds in the sky were like blood and smoke that were glued together. It was extremely dirty and turbid. He didn't bother about it, just flying towards the sun-piercing mountain mound. After a long while, he saw a sword light moving about in front of him, like it was fighting with a few illusionary images. Right at this moment, there was a sudden flash of light. It was the sword light that had slashed one of the phantoms. Along with a thunderous explosion that rumbled incessantly, the phantoms instantly exploded, and in the end, they transformed into a large mass of roiling turbid gas. Zhang Yan knew quite a bit of the Shaoqing sect's divine arts, and recognized that this art was the divine art of the extreme sword lineage, extreme Yang Thundershock. When the sword rose, it was as swift as light, and in an instant, thousands of sword lights shot out, to the point that when the sound merged together, it was like a thunderclap. Just now, the illusionary image was killed by the sword light, so it wasn't swallowed by the void hole. Naturally, there was still some energy left here. The demon-subduing slip naturally loved to devour essence, primordial energy, and souls. This was especially so since this illusion had the help of the heads of the 6 sections. The 3 treasures were all present, making it even more attractive to the slip. It circled around outside and continuously devoured the spiritual opportunity. When Zhang Yan saw that, he was deep in thought, but he didn't stop it. The demon-subduing talisman's outer appearance was like smoke, so even if the scattered energy was snatched away, no one would notice. At the same time, his illusionary image was driven by the Xian technique. At this moment he arrived in front of the mountain gate. However, if he could sense that something was wrong before he reached the area covered by the Xian technique of Shaoqing, he would stand still and not move. He didn't advance. At this moment, the second batch of illusionary images were still fighting with Elder Shui, so naturally no one bothered about him. After standing there quietly for an hour, the fourth batch of illusionary images arrived. Even though they had intelligence because they were under orders, most of them were indifferent to others. Therefore, most of them turned a blind eye to him. They brushed past one by one, except for one. However, he stopped and asked with a gloomy expression, "Why don't you attack the mountain together?" The reason why the 6 sects of the Fiend sect summoned so many phantoms was to protect the reputation of the various sections. The people chosen were mostly elders in the sect, and there were no sect masters. Even because they were allied with Yuxiao school, there were no people from other sections. However, this person's tone and expression seemed to indicate that his status was not low. Zhang Yan's illusory image glanced at him, then raised its hand and slapped the ground. A rumbling sound rang out. In an instant, the void collapsed, and the other party was shaken into a ball of spiritual vigor. Then he waved his sleeve. He swung it away. When the demon subduing slip saw that, it flashed and swallowed the spiritual energy. After doing that, it circled around the Zhang Yan illusion and suddenly flashed. Then, it darted toward the center of his brows. The illusory image's brow rose up and he pushed with his hand. A streak of mysterious energy surged over and blocked the demon subduing slip outside. However, at that moment he seemed to have sensed something. He turned around and saw a sword light charging in from afar, heading right for his face. However, he didn't dodge and just looked on coldly. Elder Shui's sword slashed over and he wanted to succeed. However, when the sword light slashed down, it brushed past the body of the illusory image like it was slashing into nothingness. It didn't touch anything and just passed through it. He was startled. Could it really be an illusion? Just as he was thinking about it, he had slashed out dozens of times. However, each time it slashed at where the illusory image stood, it passed through its body. At this moment, he noticed that something was wrong and understood that this should be the ability of Zhang Yan's body. Now, the illusory image was using it too. Although he didn't understand the profoundness behind it, he didn't have any fear in his heart. Instead, his eyes lit up and he was about to leap up and slash again. However, the illusory image grabbed onto him and his body froze, as though it was about to lean forward. The extreme sword sect focused on flying horizontally and vertically. They didn't have any worries and didn't have any heart to fight with others. They focused on moving around and searching for opportunities. In an instant, they would be thousands of miles away, and in the next, they would be within 3 feet of the enemy. Originally, if not for the Xian technique grabbing onto him, Elder Shui would have been able to use his teleportation ability to jump out of the battle circle. However, it wasn't possible, so he didn't retreat and instead advanced. With a loud shout, he transformed into thousands of sword lights and slashed forward. The illusory image still didn't move, but a glass-like chi cover suddenly appeared on its body. When the sword light fell into it, it seemed to have entered an endless distance, unable to get close to him at all. Elder Shui originally had the intention to attack in place of defense. Seeing this scene, he immediately turned his sword and wanted to fly out, but he heard a muffled, thunderous roar behind him. The sword light trembled and he couldn't help but pause for a moment. At the same time, just now, he felt a pulling force on him. At the same time, the chi cover suddenly expanded, as though it wanted to trap him inside. Elder Shui secretly cursed in his heart. He had long known that this Hall Master Duzhen was not easy to deal with, but he didn't think that an illusory image would be so powerful. At the same time, he felt depressed. Many of the abilities of the extreme sword lineage relied on teleportation. Now that he was restrained, he might not care about it if he fought with ordinary people, but if he fought with an expert, this difference was very fatal. When Zhang Yan saw this, he knew that his chance had come. This mysterious revolving heaven net wall was deduced by him, so he naturally knew all the changes within it. Thus, with a push of his heart, the demon-subduing slip suddenly turned into a crystal light and rushed inside. Then, with a turn, it actually jumped over the barrier and went straight into the illusory image's eyebrows. He had once thought that these illusory images could even use the original owner's Dao techniques, so it couldn't be obtained out of thin air. At the very least, it should have borrowed his own qi. Then, there might be a connection between them. Therefore, in his plan, he wanted to send the demon-subduing slip into his own illusory image and then find a way to make it his own through the soul hidden within it. However, this was also because he wanted to avoid the tribulation fire and temporarily couldn't interfere in the battle. Just now doing this, he couldn't be sure whether or not it would succeed, so he just wanted to give it a try. Once the demon-subduing slip entered the illusory image's body, it immediately found an incomparably dark and dirty spirit. Without hesitation, it went forward and swallowed it. However, when it was about to use its soul to take over the illusory image, it slowly dissipated like fog. When Zhang Yan saw this, he didn't show any expression of disappointment. He thought to himself, the people of the devil sect are indeed experts in the way of the soul. As expected, there are no loopholes to exploit. The tribulation fire still hasn't dissipated. If I want to get out of here soon, it seems like I have to think of another way. At this time, outside, Elder Shui had gathered all his mana and was about to fight with his life on the line. However, suddenly the illusory image in front of him collapsed. He couldn't help but be startled. After a while, he saw a thin mist flying out. He guessed that there was a fellow Taoist helping him, but he didn't know who it was. After thinking for a while, he took out his sword and leaped back to the mountain gate. While the battle was fierce here, on the other side, Wu Yunbi and Zhou Ruiying had returned to the mountain gate via the sea. If it wasn't for the tribulation fire, they might not have been able to escape from Zhang Yan's hands. Therefore, they were secretly relieved. When they came to the hall, they reported back to the banquet and sat down. Not long after he sat down, he heard the hall master of Bai Temple say, "The spiritual gate just sent a letter, inviting me to think of a way to restrain the Yudsong sect to prevent them from being attacked from both front and back, or even fall short of success. I wonder what Senior Marshal Brothers' decision is?" Taihao sect master Shang Shooting scoffed and said, "Although the 6 sects of the spiritual sect have made their move, they are attacking with illusory images now. Shaoqing has also taken out their profound technique. The two sides might not be able to determine the victor even if they fight for days and nights. Isn't it a little too early for me to make a move now?" Everyone agreed. Although the 6 sects of the spiritual sect had made their move, the Shaoqing sect had the mountain gate formation to rely on, so the outcome could not be seen for a while. However, looking at the current battle situation, there was indeed a need to delay. Tan Dingxian said, "I think this is the right time, it's not appropriate to wait any longer. Everyone, you should understand that previously, the Qinsong school did not dare to make too much of a commotion when it absorbed the earth qi because it was afraid that the fellow Taoists in the world would notice. However, it's different now. They must have unleashed it. If the earth qi is damaged too much, even if we defeat the Qinsong school after this, the Donghua continent will also lose its spiritual opportunity. It will no longer be a place for us cultivators to live. Therefore, it's better to make a move as soon as possible." Xiao Lingyun sneered, "Sect Master Tan, you're wrong. Although the Qinsong school is my archenemy, the spiritual sect has to guard against it as well. Especially since the 6 sects seem to be fighting fiercely, but in reality, they have not suffered any damage. How can I make a move so easily?" As soon as she said that, many people agreed with her. Although the 6 sects of the spiritual sect were on guard against Yuxiao's side was also on guard. Especially Nanhua Taihao, Yuan Yang, and the other sects, they knew that once they started fighting, they would definitely be the ones to charge at the front. Since they had the shifting feather technique to determine fate energy, why would they fight to the death? At the moment, the 6 demonic sects were obviously suppressing Shaoqing. When Shaoqing lost a few people, they would naturally have a chance to win. Sage Su Heng thought for a while and said, "After all, we've already made an agreement. It's not appropriate to sit back and watch. Why don't we make a compromise?" Jinren Kongjing asked, "What do you think, Hall Master Su Heng?" Sage Su Heng smiled and said, "Since he wants me to go north, then I'll go north and build up the momentum. However, we'll decide when to make a move. When we're outside the great pool of Dragon Lake, we'll surround them but not attack. This will also restrain the Qinsong school, and the 6 sects of the spiritual sect won't be able to say anything about it. What do you think, sage? Xiao Lingyun's face lit up and said, Taoist Kong Zheng, this plan is feasible. Shang Shuding also nodded and said, when we're outside the Qinsong school's mountain gate, even if something unexpected happens, we can immediately attack the mountain. Tan Dingxian cupped his hands and said, My Bu Tian Pavilion's mountain gate is already near the Mo Chiyu cliff. If Sage wants to go north, why don't you come to my mountain gate? This way, your journey will be safe. Zhenren Kongjing glanced over and saw that the Xiao and Shang sects masters were looking at him. How could he not know what they were thinking? After he, Yu Xiao, led the various sects to the front, the mountain gates of Nanhua Taihao, Yuanyang, and the other sects would naturally be behind them. However, at the same time, it would be much easier to command the 3 sections. After thinking about it, he felt that the advantages outweighed the disadvantages, so he slowly stood up from his seat and said in a deep voice, I'll inform Peak Master Ming that Hall Master Exen Ming has just returned from outside the mountain. His mana has not recovered, so he'll stay here to guard the mountain gate. The rest of you, follow me north to attack Qinsong. To be continued. Chapter 1183. After deciding on the grand plan, Zhenren Kongjing and the spiritual masters of the various sects rushed out of the hall. Standing on the cliff, they gazed into the distant sky. Outside of the Mo Chiyu cliff, a boundless green cloud gradually drifted over. Its speed seemed slow, but it was actually faster than a flying swan. If one looked carefully, one could clearly see that it was an incomparably enormous green leaf that could practically be carried. On this large leaf, there were mountain ranges, rivers, cliffs, and palaces. Under the bright sun, golden light illuminated the sky, brilliant and splendid. It was extraordinary. In the center, there was a towering watchtower. Its eaves were pointed, and its aura was arrogant. Above it, there was clear air rising, as if it was in harmony with the heavens. Tan Dingxian said, Fellow cultivators, my heaven-mending pavilion's mountain formation has arrived. This time, we will go on a punitive expedition against Qinsong. With this protection, we won't be ambushed along the way. Heaven-mending pavilion's mountain gate was refined from a formation diagram, and its defensive ability was comparable to the great formations of the various sections. Rumor has it that it could even fly around and enter the darkness. Originally, no one dared to look down on it. However, because the 9 continents absorbed too much spiritual energy and almost fell to the ground, the various sects couldn't help but look down on it. Many people even thought that it was just an exaggeration. Xiao Lingyun looked left and right and said, Sect Master Tan, I have something to ask. The restriction of your sect's mountain gate is only supported by fellow cultivator Tai Hao's large leaf, but if this leaf is damaged and the mountain gate falls, what should we do? Tan Dingxian said, Everyone, don't worry. Although my heaven-mending mountain gate relies on the help of fellow cultivator Tai Hao school to survive, that is because we scrupulously abide by the sect's rules and did not dare to use underhanded methods. Now, there are no such obstructions. Heaven Mending Pavilion was established by the joint efforts of several powerful cultivators over 10,000 years. It was to prevent future generations from repeating the same mistakes and causing the world to change. Many powerful methods were left behind, but in order to prevent future generations from using them for personal gain, many rules and restrictions were also set. For example, when the sect masters of each generation inherited their position, they all had to swear an oath in front of the ancestral tablets. If the energy of the earth did not move, then the formation diagram would not move. Therefore, only ordinary restrictions were used to guard the mountain gate. However, the might of the formation had never been displayed since the founding of the sect. Zhenren Kongjing was obviously aware of the inside story. Otherwise, he would not have agreed with Tan Dingxian's suggestion. He said, On this expedition to Qinsong, we may encounter obstacles along the way. Without the help of fellow heaven-mending pavilions formation diagram, I'm afraid it would be difficult to reach that place. Not only would the journey be smooth sailing if one were to use this formation to advance, as long as one arrived before the Great Dragon Lake, it would be equivalent to reaching the throat of the Great Dragon Lake. It could reduce the advantage of the mountain guarding formation to the minimum. Tan Dingxian said, "Fellow Taoists, please follow me." Back then, he leaped up and rode a streak of light towards the green leaf. Jinren Kongjing smiled and stepped into the air as well. When they saw him move, Xiao Lingyun and Shang Shooting naturally followed along with all the cultivators of Yuxiao School. Heaven Mending Pavilion had been operating for tens of thousands of years, so there were many beautiful sceneries. However, at this moment, no one was in the mood to admire them. Tan Dingxian invited everyone to take their seats in the large pavilion, then he excused himself. As he walked out of the door, he saw Bu Jingsu was already waiting there. He took a few steps forward. And asked, "Junior brother, how is it?" Bu Jingsu replied, "I've already taken out all the pill jades according to senior brother sect master's wishes. I've already inspected them. Even if we fight for a few months, it should be enough." Heaven Mending Pavilion was called a sect, but in reality, it was the protector of the spiritual opportunity of the 9 continents. Because there were many methods left behind by their ancestors, they were not afraid of losing their inheritance. Therefore, there were at most 1 or 2 heavenly passage cultivators. As for the pill jades, they did not use them if they could. After tens of thousands of years, other than a few that were used to support their fellow Taoists, the rest were all saved up. It was all for the sake of being able to activate this formation diagram in the face of a great disaster. Tan Dingxian said, "It won't take that long. Not to mention a few months, even if Qinsong School is allowed to absorb half a month's worth of Earth Qi, the Donghua continent will end up like the West continent." Bu Jingsu said, "Shi Xiang is saying within half a month. Is it a foregone conclusion?" Tan Dingxian said, "If nothing unforeseen happens, that should be the case." Bu Jingsu did not know what was going on. He did not say anything and only sighed softly. Tan Dingxian looked at him and thought that he was worried about the battle situation. She comforted him, "Junior apprentice brother, there's no need to worry. Qin Song, Shaoqing, and the other sects are going against the trend. It's an immoral act. They won't be popular in the end. They'll definitely be defeated." Bu Jingsu was not as confident as Tan Dingxian. He always felt that Qinsong School was prepared and unprepared, and that it would not be easy to deal with them. Just now, it was such a good situation, but Zhang Yan came out alone and almost turned the situation around. In the end, they were forced to use the tribulation fire, and just now, they were forced to retreat. Until now, Qinsong School had not used many tricks. They were most likely waiting for the right time. Looking at it from this perspective, it would be a tough battle. Tan Dingxian said a few words and did not want to delay any longer. He said, "I'll go activate the formation now. Junior apprentice brother, please greet the guests on my behalf." Bu Jingsu hurriedly said, "Don't worry, senior apprentice brother. With me here, nothing will go wrong." Meanwhile, in the main pavilion, Jinren Kongjing summoned Enlightened Bai to the side hall and said, "Junior apprentice brother, do you remember the 3 people who invaded our South Sea?" Enlightened Bai thought about it and said softly, "Senior apprentice brother, are you saying that if we leave, they'll come out again to stir up trouble?" Jinren Kongjing said with certainty, "It's not a possibility, it'll definitely happen." Enlightened Bai said with a serious expression, "Only Peak Master Qiao Ming and Hall Master Xin Ming are left in the sect. I'm afraid it won't be easy to deal with them. If Master is alarmed, it'll be our fault as disciples." Although Yuxiao Mountain Gate was guarded by Master Lingya, he vaguely knew that when one's cultivation base reached Master Lingya's level, there would be great consequences if he made a move. He might even give Qinsong and Shaoqing a chance. Only someone like Zhang Yan, who was too unreasonable, would provoke Master Lingya to take the initiative to make a move. However, it might not happen again. Besides, if Master Lingya had to take action personally for such a small matter, what was the use of disciples like them? Jinren Kongjing said, "Junior apprentice brother, Have you noticed that the calamity fire has already descended for more than half a day, but my fate hasn't changed? Maybe that Zhang Yan is not dead yet, or maybe the other party has used some tricks again. However, it's not a good thing that our fate is equal. If we're not careful, we'll be at the bottom. Enlightened by understood and said softly, so senior apprentice brother, you're leading everyone to the north on purpose to lure these people out, kill them, and save some fate at the same time? Jinren Kongjing smiled faintly and said, it's just a few people, it's not worth it for me to do this. However, I can get rid of them at the same time. After we leave, you can sneak back. There's no need to go to the mountains, just hide near the South Sea. If they come out, you can take care of them. As he spoke, he took out a few more Dharma treasures and handed them to him. He warned, previously, the three of them used the Dragon Palace to escape. This time, you have to be wary of this too. Although you have the immovable sphere technique, it only covers the 4 continents. If it's on the Southern Sea, I won't be able to stop him. Reverend Bai Ren received it solemnly and said, I know what to do. If they really come out to stir up trouble, I will do my best. If not, I can at least leave 1 or 2 people behind. Jinren Kongjing nodded and said, with you taking action, I can rest assured. In his opinion, although Baidu Jinren had not reached the stage of cultivating yuanqi, but compared to Wu Fenggu in the past, he was similar. If it was a head-on battle, it would not be a problem to take down the 3, after all, not everyone could be like that Zhang Yan. At that moment, a boy came in, bowed down and said, Lord, Reverend Bu is here. Jinren Kongjing grunted. Reverend Bai Ren stood up and bowed, saying, then I will take my leave first. About 2 hours later, Bu Tian Pavilion's mountain gate suddenly changed into spiritual light. The mountains and rivers, pavilions and towers suddenly collapsed. Everything here turned into a piece of flat map. Then, with a spin, it flew diagonally into the sky. A mountain gate formation was flying towards them. It was impossible for everyone in Qinsong School not to notice it. Seeing that Yu Xiao was about to fight a decisive battle, everyone's expression became solemn. Meng Zhen said in a deep voice, the 6 demonic sects are besieging Shaoqing. Yu Xiao School is heading north to suppress me, so I can't help from the side. Qi Hongchan also said, I think so too. Let's not talk about the fact that our fates are similar. Yu Xiao School still has many tricks up their sleeves. No matter what, it is not the time to stake everything on one throw. They are probably just bluffing to trip me up. Sun Jinren sneered, it doesn't matter even if it's true. He has the guts to fight, but I can't ask for more. At this moment, Hua Xian bowed towards his seat and said, I don't know how many people Yu Xiao sent, but to attack our mountain gate, there must be a lot of them. At this moment, Mo Chiyu Cliff should be extremely empty. This disciple thinks that we can call for Tao Jinren and the other 2 to attack. We don't hope to break through Southern Cliff Continent, but to make it difficult for Yu Xiao. Sun Jinren said, is it too early to attack now? Qi Hongchan said, since Yu Xiao School came out this time, they won't turn back halfway. No matter when they attack, there shouldn't be any problems. Meng Zhen bowed towards his seat and said, the 3 people from the Southern Sea were originally controlled by Hall Master Du Zhen. Now that Hall Master Du Zhen isn't here, we can only ask Sect Master Spiritual Master to make a decision. Sect Master Qin thought for a moment, then said, Ida, send a talisman to the Southern Sea. Let them act according to the situation.